Committee on Oversight and Government Reform and the Committee on Natural Resources will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Pleased to have both committees here. I'm pleased to recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Natural Resources, my colleague from Utah, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes in his opening statement.
Hey, you started the clock and I couldn't even find the button to turn this on. Thank you, Mr. Chaffetz. It's nice to be here with you. Over a year ago, EPA began remediation on the Gold King mine in Colorado that ultimately led to 3 million gallons of orange crap that went down the Animas and San Juan rivers from Colorado into New Mexico, Utah, and perhaps even into Arizona. EPA documents show the agency was aware as early as June of 2014 that a massive blowout was possible. However, EPA decided not to test the hydrostatic pressure in the mines. Instead, they simply dug around it with heavy machinery. If an individual or private company had done this, EPA would already have made sure there was hell to pay. EPA's aggressive enforcement tactics have often resulted in criminal charges for mistakes or accidents. So in Alaska, unarmed EPA agents descended on a small mining town based on speculation that individuals may have violated the Clean Water Act. In Wyoming, EPA is threatening a rancher with $75,000 a day in fines because he built a stock pond on his own land. One dismissed EPA regional director spoke of crucifying someone to make an example for others. I even have a constituent who had jail time because he tried to work with the EPA, and EPA told him when they asked for advice on how to solve his problem, we don't advise, we just regulate. Evidence from states across this nation demonstrate EPA is more concerned with the enforcing of a heavy-handed regulation than actually protecting our resources. Now, EPA has violated not only this issue, but also violated environmental laws like the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act. Making sure EPA is held accountable for this bill is the cause and primary reason for today's hearing. Another is to hear from those who are affected by EPA's action. We want to find out what happened, how to solve it, make sure it does not happen again. We want to find out why EPA was so slow in notifying downstream users of what was happening to them. EPA basically sat back and let others do the work of information. And when those authorities asked EPA for information about the spill or access to the results of their water quality or sediment sampling plans, EPA simply delayed. I want to know that I found the states of New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado were quick and competent in their efforts. I'm very proud of what the tribes were in this area. They were effective with the resources that they actually had. Even EPA workers who work on the ground, I thought, did a great job. But even they were kept in the dark by EPA Washington. EPA is not alone in this shameful behavior. Interior Department was nearly invisible in the wake of this spill, despite the fact that every one of their agencies has some jurisdiction. Bureau of Reclamation released over 1 billion gallons of water from the Navajo Dam to dilute the spill. I'd like to know who did that, why, and understanding the problems that resulted from that release of water. But the agencies that were simply there, like Fish and Wildlife, the Park Service, BLM, they have responsibility, but they were AWOL, and they should be held accountable for some of the results as well. I am disappointed that the Department of Interior is not here to testify on how they will go about their separate investigation. We need to know what the scope of that investigation is, and waiting 60 days in sacrosanct area while they make their decisions is a wrong approach. We need to know ahead of time if the wrong questions are being asked in the first place. That's why I wish Department of Interior was actually here to testify on how they are going to go about their review of what's going on. Finally, I have one other complaint. I understand that Administrator McCarthy agreed to come only if she appeared first and on her own panel. That is something we would not do in my committee. You're lucky that this is a joint committee. Refusing to sit alongside representatives of the states and tribes who have traveled across this country to discuss this disaster is simply unheard of and is wrong. It is arrogance and it is hubris that goes through the agency, and it should not take place. The administration does not deserve special treatment. They should be at the same panel with the same other people. So I'm sorry, I find this request shameful, and the first thing you should do is apologize to the Navajo Nation, the Southern Utes in New Mexico and Colorado for refusing to sit at the same table and take the same questions with them. Now, both the EPA and Department of Interior will be held accountable today and in the future as the recovery efforts continue. So I look forward to this hearing to find out specifics of what happened and how we solve this in the future so that we do not replicate this again And before we move forward on any other kind of reclamation in this effort, we got to make sure that we do not recreate the mistakes that have been done in the past. Accountability is going to be important. I look forward to hearing the testimony of all the witnesses that are here. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. Grijalva, the ranking member of the Committee on Natural Resources, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you to Chairman Bishop for holding this hearing. I would like to believe that Republicans are holding so many hearings on this particular incident because they genuinely care about water quality, wildlife, and public health of affected communities. I would like to believe that this has opened your eyes to the problem of abandoned mines throughout the West, acid mine drainage, and the difficult task of cleaning this mess up. Unfortunately, as much as I would like to believe, we all know this is not the case. The majority's overwhelming interest in this issue comes from the fact that it was the Environmental Protection Agency that was holding the shovel when the spill occurred. And the majority cannot pass up a chance to attack EPA. For them, this is a gold mine. This being mined like a political gold mine, and the gold rush is on. I'm not here to defend EPA on this issue at all. They made a mistake, particularly when it came to notifying the Navajo nations and others in New Mexico about the spill and the consequences and the mitigation that was going to be needed. This spill imposed real cost on people downstream. The legitimate claims from people affected by this spill deserve to be dealt with quickly, and I hope they will be made whole quickly. But it is important to put this incident in perspective, which is so sorely lacking around here. First, the EPA and the state of Colorado were there to clean up someone else's mess. EPA and the state of Colorado did not hollow out the inside of these mountains in the search for gold. They did not simply pick up and leave when things weren't profitable anymore. Those were the owners and operators of the Gold King mine. But Colorado and the EPA were there this summer, as they have been for years, working closely with local stakeholders trying to figure out a way to clean the mess up. Second, this was not a pristine mountain stream. The 4 mines on the Cement Creek have been leaking 330 million gallons of acid mine drainage each year. The EPA spill released 3 million gallons. That effectively means that there's an equivalent size spill every 3 days on the river. Let me put it another way. This is a juice box that we're all used to, and our, well, at least my grandkids use all the time. Represents the amount of wastewater that was spilled on August 5th because of EPA. This water jug represents the amount that goes into the river each year. Third, it is important to point out that EPA was not there by itself. In addition to the longtime support of the local community, which has fought pollution from these mines for well over a century, the EPA was there in partnership with the state of Colorado, a partnership that has existed for decades. It was the EPA and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment that investigated the site back in the 1990s. It was EPA and the Colorado Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety that were working to stop the drainage from these mines, and both of these agencies concluded there wouldn't be a blowout at the Gold King mine. But what we need more than perspective on this particular spill is perspective on the entire issue. The problem here is a horribly outdated mining law that dates back to the time of the telegraph and the horse and buggy. We now have phones we carry in our pockets, but our mining law remains stuck in 1872. Because of that law, we have over 500,000 abandoned mines in this nation, tens of thousands of miles of rivers contaminated with acid mine waste, and not nearly enough money to clean this all up. It's time to update this outdated relic. Earlier this year, I introduced the Hard Rock Mining Reform and Reclamation Act. It gives us a modern mining law with strong environmental and public health protection. It raises the money to help clean up abandoned hard rock mines from coast to coast. Sadly, no Republicans have agreed to co-sponsor this bill yet. Whether it is uranium, proposals to mine dangerously close to the Grand Canyon, whether it is gold in New Mexico, copper ore in Arizona, the fact remains that as these companies leave, they leave behind, to the miners that worked hard on those tough jobs, to the affected communities, they're left to pick up and have to deal with all the consequences of contamination that are left behind. Hard rock mining, because of the law of HSM, pays no royalties at all. And it is time that the majority, if they really care about what's happening to these communities and the rivers in the West, I invite them to join me in trying to reform our 19th century mining laws. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. You wouldn't mind taking that thing on the... Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. In Colorado last month, there was a massive environmental disaster. 3 million gallons of polluted mine wastewater spilled into the Animas River in a matter of hours. It was the worst ecological catastrophe in the region in recent memory. The spill released a mustard-colored plume in the regional river system stretching some 80 miles long. We have a video that I'd like to show of what happened. Try that again. All right, when they fix that, we will come back to it. That is not the right video. So what caused the accident? What caused the accident? The Environmental Protection Agency. My colleagues and I often disagree on the merits of EPA's action. However, I'm certain that everyone in this room can agree that EPA should not be making the environment worse. We are here to examine how this disaster happened. We're also here to examine how it was managed. And most importantly, we're here to make sure it never ever happens again. The EPA must be held fully accountable for the accident. Last year, a private company in West Virginia accidentally released roughly 7,500 gallons of chemicals into the river. Remember, this spill was 3 million gallons. The EPA immediately began a criminal investigation. The EPA built a case against the company that resulted in a criminal indictment for 6 employees. The company was forced to declare bankruptcy. In 1999, a private company in Alaska inadvertently spilled 1,500 gallons of oil into a nearby river. The project manager of the site was sentenced to prison for 6 months. And yet I've heard the EPA administrator go on television saying, we hold our people to an even higher standard. I'm not aware of anybody who's been dismissed, held accountable, let alone given some criminal charges along the way. In the aftermath of the Deep Horizon oil spill in 2010, President Obama demanded that those responsible be held fully accountable. When asked if he would fire the CEO of the company responsible, President Obama said, quote, he wouldn't be working for me, end quote. Has anything happened to any of the EPA employees who are responsible for this? Not a thing. The EPA should not get special treatment or avoid the consequences they instituted on others. One of the more offensive things that I heard as I visited with the president of the Navajo Nation, who was deeply affected by this, is that days after this, we had EPA employees walking the banks of the river, not there to do a cleanup, not there to help with the cows and the cattle and other things, but they were out there handing out these waiver forms, trying to get a waiver form signed to limit the liability days after this happened. Many of these people don't even speak English, and yet you had employees of the federal government working for you out there trying to limit their liability. That is so fundamentally totally wrong and offensive. Did the EPA call the Navajo Nation to let them know what was happening right away? No, it was 48 hours until you bothered to even make contact with the Navajo Nation. And then, when you offered support, 2 people came down, 2, to go sit in the control center, basically to spy and to see what was going on there. They weren't down there working hard to get this thing cleaned up, and we're going to hear from the president of the Navajo Nation. He's the one that told us about this and what's going on. You could shake your head no, but that's exactly what happened, and it's highly offensive. Hand out waiver forms. Try to limit the liability instead of taking care of what you knew was happening more than a year in advance. More than a year in advance. And that's what's so deeply concerning here. One other point that I'd like to make as we go along in this. In June of 2014, the EPA contracted with the Environmental Restoration, the company, to work the Gold King mine. In the contract, again, a year in advance, more than a year in advance, the contract says, quote, conditions may exist that could result in a blowout of the blockages and cause a release of large volumes of contaminated mine waters and sediment from inside the mine which contain concentrated heavy metals, end quote. They knew this was a distinct possibility. They knew that this was going to happen more than a year in advance, and yet obviously they did not take the necessary precautions to make sure that this did not happen. We want to have some answers to that and a host of other questions. We do appreciate you being here today. Look forward to a lively discussion, but I'd like to recognize Mr. Cartwright, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, for his comments and opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator McCarthy, for appearing before us. I understand this is your third time testifying this week about this specific topic, and I understand this is the fourth hearing overall on the question of the Gold King mine release. Now, it is certainly appropriate for Congress to examine this spill, how it happened, whether it could have been prevented, how it was handled, and what can be done to prevent similar types of spills into the future. But before we begin, I want to make one very important point. While the Gold King mine spill was damaging, as has been pointed out by Mr. Grijalva, this spill pales in comparison to a series of even bigger toxic spills from many other mines that have been abandoned for decades, and the cumulative effect of daily seepage from mines all across our nation. For more than 100 years, the Animas River has been plagued by pollution caused by abandoned mines like the Gold King mine. For example, in 1975, a dam broke on a pond holding mine waste, sending 50,000 tons of sludge into the Animas River, turning it, at that time, the color of aluminum paint. 3 years later, an estimated 500 million gallons of water and sludge from the Sunnyside mine turned the Animas River black all the way to New Mexico. Now, last week, the mayor of Durango, Colorado, Dean Brookie, testified before the Science Committee that, quote, the August 5th release of 3 million gallons was equivalent to roughly a week's worth of normal discharge from this mine. He said this was a level of only 2% of the annual discharge from the mine. He testified, quote, the heavy metal contamination that emanates from hundreds of separate mine sites in the mountains upstream of Durango has been impacting our community since the late 19th century. It is a constant, if often invisible, threat to our community's public health and economic well-being, and has thus far resisted thoughtful and well-intended efforts to mitigate this risk, unquote. Now, in Pennsylvania, my own district faces this same threat of continual mine discharges. You know, we used to mine coal in northeastern Pennsylvania, hard coal. In fact, there are 575 abandoned mine lands in my district, creating 382 miles of acid mine drainage affected streams. The fact is that mining companies have not been held responsible for the toxic devastation they left behind, but EPA and states are being forced to clean up this legacy of leakage with resources that are completely inadequate. Using data obtained from the states, the environmental advocacy group Earthworks estimated there are more than 500,000 abandoned hard rock mines throughout the country. To clean up just 147 of these mine sites, it would cost the federal government between $7 billion and $24 billion, according to a 2004 estimate. But in fiscal year 2015, the budget for cleaning up hard rock mine sites totaled only about $40 million. Congress has to provide more resources to address this problem. And Congress must address the much broader problem of cleaning up these mine sites. That's why I am pleased to be an original co-sponsor of Mr. Grijalva's bill, the Hard Rock Mining Reform and Reclamation Act of 2015, to help remedy the problem. Now, finally, as I said at the outset, I think it is completely appropriate to conduct oversight of EPA's actions in this case, so the hearing is appropriate. But EPA has taken responsibility for this accident, and independent technical experts, including experts at the Department of Interior and EPA's Inspector General, are currently assessing what could be done differently to avoid this type of spill in the future and to speed the notification of all parties involved. But let us take this opportunity now to focus on the larger issue of the devastating legacy of pollution that mining companies have left behind all across our nation. Let me close by extending our welcome to the other witnesses today from the Navajo Nation, the Southern Ute Tribal Council, and from New Mexico and Colorado. I look forward to your testimony, not only about this spill, but about what steps Congress can take to address the much broader problems we are facing with water quality throughout the country. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. We're going to try to show this video again. I think this is less than a minute. Shows the start of the spill and what happened. There we go.
Oh, you want popcorn too?
We're digging really high. Is he going to go close it up? What do we do now?
Thank you. Some 3 million gallons. We're going to hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement. The Chair also would like to note the presence today of some of our colleagues, Congressman Steve Pierce of New Mexico, Congressman Scott Tipton of Colorado, as well as Ben Ray Lujan, also of New Mexico. We appreciate your interest in this issue and look forward to your insight. I'd ask unanimous consent that Congressman Pierce, Lujan, and Tipton be allowed to fully participate in today's hearing.
Mr. Chairman, are you really sure you want Pierce and Tipton to be here? Can we discuss that at all?
We have some great flexibility here that we're exercising, and the Pope's coming next week. We're trying to be as nice as possible.
All right, I won't say anything then.
Absolutely.
Without objection, so ordered. We now recognize the distinguished witness on our first panel. We're pleased to welcome Ms. Gina McCarthy, the Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Pursuant to Oversight and Government Reform Committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. If you'd please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do, Chairman.
Thank you. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. Your entire written statement will obviously be made part of the record, but we would appreciate your verbal comments, and we now recognize you for those at this time.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz and Bishop. Ranking
If you could move that microphone, some apologies. I just want to make sure the audio is sufficient. As close as you can. Thank you.
All right, better?
Much better. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz and Bishop, Ranking Member Cummings and Grijalva, and members of the committee. I am Gina McCarthy, Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss the August 5th Gold King mine release and subsequent EPA response. This was a tragic and unfortunate incident, and the EPA has taken responsibility to ensure that it is cleaned up appropriately. The EPA's core mission is to ensure a clean environment and to protect public health, and we're dedicated to continuing to do our job to protect the environment and to hold ourselves to the same high standard we demand of others. The EPA was at the Gold King mine on August 5th conducting an investigation to assess mine conditions and ongoing water discharges, dewater the mine pool, and assess the feasibility of further mine remediation. While excavating above a mine opening, the lower portion of the bedrock crumbled and approximately 3 million gallons of pressurized water discharged from the mine into Cement Creek, which is a tributary to the Animas River. EPA and Colorado officials informed downstream jurisdictions in Colorado within hours of the release before the plume reached drinking water intakes and irrigation diversions, and notifications to other downstream jurisdictions continued the following day, allowing for those intakes to be closed prior to the plume's arrival. In the aftermath of the release, we initiated an internal review of the incident, and we released an internal review summary report on August 26th, which includes an assessment of the events and potential factors contributing to the Gold King mine incident. The report provides observations, conclusions, and recommendations that the region should consider applying when conducting ongoing and planned site assessments, investigations, and construction or removal projects at similar types of sites across the country. The EPA will implement all the recommendations from the report and has shared its findings with external reviewers. In addition to the internal review, the U.S. Department of the Interior is leading an independent assessment of the factors that led to the Gold King mine incident. The goal of DOI's independent review is to provide the EPA with an analysis of the incident that took place at the Gold King mine, including the contributing causes. Both internal and external reviews will help inform the EPA for ongoing and planned site assessments, investigations, and construction or removal projects. One of our foremost priorities is to keep the public informed about the impacts from the Gold King mine release and our response activities. The EPA has closely coordinated with our federal partners and with officials in Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, the Southern Ute, the Ute Mountain Ute tribes, and Navajo Nation to keep them apprised of water and sediment sampling results, which are routinely posted on our website. These results do indicate that the water and sediment have returned to pre-event conditions, and they supported local and state decision makers as they made decisions about lifting water restrictions along the Animas and the San Juan rivers on August 14th and 15th. Finally, I want to clarify that the EPA was working with the state of Colorado to take action at the Gold King mine to address both the potential for a catastrophic release and the ongoing adverse water quality impacts caused by the significant mine discharges into the upper Animas watershed. Based upon 2009 to 2014 flow data, approximately 330 million gallons of contaminated water is being discharged from mines in the watershed each year to Cement Creek in the Animas River. That's 100 times more than the estimated release from the Gold King mine on August 5th. The EPA was and continues to work with the state of Colorado and the Animas River stakeholder group to address these significant discharges from mines in the upper Animas watershed that are impacting these waterways. I think it's important to note that across the country, our Superfund program has successfully cleaned up more than 1,150 hazardous waste sites and successfully responded to or provided oversight for thousands of removal actions to protect human health and the environment. That reflects our longstanding commitment to protect human health and the environment that we will continue to pursue and continue to support the administration's request for an abandoned mines lands fee to help cover the costs of cleanup of these sites. All of the affected residents of Colorado and New Mexico and members of the Southern Ute, Ute Mountain Ute, and Navajo Nation tribes can be assured that EPA has and will continue to take responsibility to help ensure that the Gold King mine release is cleaned up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you. We now recognize the gentleman from Utah, the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Bishop, for his questions.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy, for being here. As usual, I'm still disappointed that you were alone on that panel, but thank you for being here. Ms. McCarthy, are you aware that the federal agencies are required under the Endangered Species Act to review any discretionary action they plan to undertake to see if it may affect endangered species or their critical habitat, and that if the agency determines that endangered species or their critical habitat may be affected, they must consult with Fish and Wildlife Service?
I am aware.
Did EPA consult with Fish and Wildlife on its activity on the Gold King mine prior to the August 5th disaster?
EPA had no reason to consult with them because we did not plan to take action that would have discharged that amount of material into the creek.
So you assert that you did not anticipate the release. At least that's the email. And I'm glad, you two agencies weren't talking before. I'm glad we finally forced you to actually have some communication last night before you send this through. But your assertion is you did not anticipate the release, that it would affect downstream endangered species, so therefore you didn't consult with Fish and Wildlife.
We were actually there, Mr. Chairman, because of the threat of that release in attempting to
You did not
mitigate that
contact
threat.
them because you assert you didn't anticipate that. Now, is that what you and your
We were
staff
there
are
to
saying?
prevent that type of release. That's exactly right.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said.
We were there to actually prevent a release, because that is the reason why we were working with the state of Colorado and others at the site. Was to try to depressurize.
I understand.
if
That's
that
cool.
was
I
an
appreciate that. But
Okay.
the fact is you did not talk to Fish and Wildlife, even though that is the law that you're supposed
Only if we
to.
are taking action, as you indicated, sir. That's
No, I'm sorry.
my
Ms.
requirement.
McCarthy, listen to this. In the final health and safety plan, emergency and rapid response services for the Gold King site, prepared by the Environmental Restoration, that's your contractor, for EPA Region 8 and dated September 4th, 2014, it contains a section entitled Spills, Leaks, or Releases. And it states, locate the source and stop the flow if it can be done safely. The task order statement of work for EPA Region 8 prepared by the Environmental Restoration, this is dated July 25th, 2014. Conditions may exist that could result in a blowout of the blockages and cause a release of a large volume of contaminated mine water and sediment from inside the mine, which contains concentrated heavy metals. Clearly, these documents demonstrate that, in fact, you did not only anticipate the possibility of a release, but also of a major blowout. And yet, EPA conducted no consultations with Fish and Wildlife as is required under the Endangered Species Act. Now, are you aware that these activities are both criminal and civil penalties for knowingly violating the Endangered Species Act?
Sir, I'm really not trying to argue with you. I'm trying to explain that the statement you're reading indicates that we were worried about those conditions existing. We clearly stated it to the contractor so that there would be no actions taken that would have caused that release, but instead we were there to prevent that release.
That is wonderful, but ma'am, the
That's-
fact is, we're anticipating this type of thing happening. The law that you insist everyone else obey, the law says you have to contact Fish and Wildlife and consult with them. The fact is, you did not do it, and you had over a year to accomplish that fact.
Sir, if I was there to take action to release this material, we wouldn't be standing here today. We were taking action in an attempt to prevent that release, knowing that it was a considerable risk to leave it as it was.
That is sweet, and I appreciate that, and I know you feel terrible about it, but the bottom line is, your documents say you anticipated a potential major blowout. And the law says if you anticipate a major blowout, you have to contact Fish and Wildlife. And until last night, you did not contact Fish and Wildlife. Your agency did not do it. That's what the law requires. And there are criminal and civil penalties for violating that law, which you violated. Now, I don't really care what your goal was. It may be noble. It doesn't make a difference. You violated the law. A standard you make everyone else live by, you violated, and you're doing it with impunity. Now, are you aware that the San Juan River, starting in Farmington, New Mexico, there's a designated critical habitat for endangered fish that would be violated, a violation of the ESA for an agency to cause adverse modifications of the habitats by spilling millions of gallons of this water and these heavy metals? You realize that that area does exist?
I was not aware until you just said it, sir, no.
So have you or your agency discussed EPA's failure to consult with Fish and Wildlife Service prior to this hearing or any of our requests prior to this hearing?
We do not believe that we actually constituted a failure to actually notify concerning endangered species, because the actions we were taking were intended to stop a blowout. Clearly, there was a problem at the site. That's what we're looking at now to identify.
All right, I appreciate you making your own interpretation of the law, but that's not what the law requires, and that is not what the law says.
Okay, sir.
You violated the law, period. Now, the communications you said you made, oh, I'm sorry, I'm over. I apologize for that. I'll get another shot at this. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, getting back to the subject of the hearing, which is the Gold King mine
Yes, sir.
the role EPA had and the role EPA has at this point. The question is, if EPA and the state had not been at the Gold King mine at all, what would have eventually happened to the water that was released on August 5th?
I think, as you know, sir, our reason for being there was the degraded water quality, a result of 300+ million gallons that were going into the creek and the Animas River over time. It was anticipated that there was a serious potential for a blowout. We were there working with Colorado and the Animas River Stakeholder Group to address through a work plan an opportunity to try to mitigate that and basically resolve an issue that was of significant concern to those communities.
The affected Native Nations issue that they have legitimately raised is the issue of notification.
Yes.
Rapid and on-time notification as to what was occurring and the effect that it could have on tribal lands and their people. Your response to the lack of rapid and necessary notification to that by the agency?
The agency did institute its notification procedure the same day. That was able to effectively get to the state of Colorado that day and ensure that before the plume arrived at any intake for drinking water or for irrigation, that there was an ability to mitigate that and make sure that the spill was contained. So that was good. The following day, we completed the notifications to the downstream folks. So we're talking about a spill on the 5th, and we completed the notifications on the 6th. Now, is that rapid? I would argue that we should have done better. I would argue that it would have been much better and more appropriate to reach everybody the same day. Are we trying to do better? Yes. Have we issued a notification to all of our regions to go back, take a look at what our notification process is? How do we improve it? How do we test it frequently to make sure that it's done? And I think we could have done a lot better at this. But the good news is that we were able to beat the plumes all the way down so that we were able to protect those drinking water supplies in those irrigation channels as best we could.
Madam Administrator, the Hard Rock Mining Reform and Reclamation Act has within it a provision that would create a fund for cleaning up of the hundreds of thousands of abandoned hard rock mine sites and in the country. This provision has been endorsed by the administration by being included in the President's budget. The funds necessary, how does it help with addressing the problem not only that we're dealing with here today, but the potential that exists particularly in the West and across this country?
I think it would help significantly, and certainly we're very supportive of the President's initiative in the fiscal year 16 budget, and we think that it's incredibly important to have resources associated with this. We are talking about legacy mines where we will have almost no ability to go after
anybody.
Principles involved in this. And we know that just in Colorado alone, we have 23,000 of those. In the Animas, the upper Animas, it's 400 mines. That's why we were there, because there was no ability over the past 20, 30, 40 years to really effectively address this, even though the state worked hard at it and EPA tried to help as well. So this is a significant problem in the Western Alaska, where we estimate there's at least 161,000 of these mines left, where they continue, in many cases, to degrade water quality.
Administrator, there's certainly an implication by the majority, well, it's not really an implication, it's a direct statement, that if a private company had done this, EPA's response to this incident would have been much stronger, much more severe. Is EPA treating itself any differently here than it would treat a private company in the same position? That's the question.
No, sir. We would have required any company that was doing a response action, where they were out doing an emergency response action to keep their folks safe if a spill occurred, and then to clean it downstream, to take responsibility, and then to make sure that over time long-term consequences are addressed and mitigated. That's exactly what EPA is doing here. We have taken full responsibility for our actions.
Thank you. Yield back. Thank you.
I recognize myself for 5 minutes. If you had to give yourself a letter grade on your response, what would you give yourself so far?
Sir, I'm not giving myself a letter grade. I'm doing the best I can to look at what this incident
You said
was,
in your
what caused it.
you said in your opening statement, the EPA has closely coordinated with our federal partners and with officials in Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Southern Ute and Ute Mountain tribes, and the Navajo Nation to keep them apprised of water and sediment sampling results, which are routinely posted on our website. I got to tell you, I'm highly offended by those comments. Sitting behind you on the front row is the president of the Navajo Nation. I want to read some things from his testimony. These are his words, not my words. To begin with, the United States Environmental Protection Agency inexplicably delayed notification of the spill to the Navajo Nation. The spill occurred on the morning of August 5th, but the nation was not informed of the release until August 6th, a full day later, and not even by the Environmental Protection Agency, but by the state of New Mexico. It took the EPA almost 2 full days to notify us. We view this as a violation of the government-to-government relationship between the federal government and the Navajo Nation. How do you answer that?
Well, sir, I'm working closely with the president. I have great respect for him. And
No, you're not. No, you're not. You took 2 days before you called them.
Let me just answer. The call from New Mexico was the way in which we actually do these notifications. We work with states. That's not inappropriate.
To put in your statement that you're working closely with the Navajo Nation is totally misleading.
Sir.
I got to keep going. The Environmental Protection Agency also demonstrated complete lack of transparency. He goes on to say the media was receiving faster and fuller information from the EPA than the Navajo Nation. For example, the New York Times reported the spill hours before EPA provided the nation with the notice of the spill, and media sources reported the EPA confirmed the presence of arsenic on August 7th, whereas the Environmental Protection Agency still had not reported the presence of arsenic to the nation even by Sunday, August 9th. What's your excuse for that?
Sir, I have indicated that our notifications could have been better, but the Navajo was given
No, you
notice
didn't. In
the
your
day after.
testimony, you said you're working closely with
We
them.
are working
You didn't say
closely
you
with
screwed up on the communication.
Why
would it take 2
I
days?
didn't say that either, sir. I said that we did take a day. I regret that. I wish it had been earlier, but the plume actually
It took
didn't
2
reach
days.
Navajo until the 8th. So we had time to work with them, and we have been working hard to coordinate with them ever since.
Your first call was to the media, not to the Navajo Nation, and I have a problem with that.
I did not make any calls, sir, I don't
Why?
know.
That's the problem. That's the problem. You didn't make a call. You have a president of the Navajo Nation, and you personally don't get involved in this. One of the
I
worst
did,
spills
sir.
we've ever had.
I did, sir, get involved. Could it have been earlier?
When did you call the president of the Navajo Nation?
I believe that I went to the site on the 11th and 12th.
Well,
That is when
let's
I
go
was
to
there.
let's go to the site visit, because the president of the Navajo Nation wanted to visit the site, and you denied him. You would not take him to that site. We quote, this is from the Navajo president, "We requested a tour from the Environmental Protection Agency but faced immediate resistance. Staff indicated they would only take us to the confluence of the Cement Creek and the Animas River." He goes on, but you did not allow them, the EPA would not allow them to go to the site. Why not?
As far as my understanding, and I wasn't at the site of the mine, is that it was a dangerous location, and we brought them as close as they could, and they actually seemed at that point in time to be very satisfied that they were being protected and getting an opportunity to be at the site.
So you were doing it to protect them.
Many times, that is you yourself saw the site in the video. There was damage that occurred. We're keeping people safe, but there is no way in which we have kept people from going as close to the site as they could safely get. And the Navajo, in fact, went there.
They did not get there, and that's the testimony. Quote, "We finally convinced them to take us within a half mile of the point of release. We walked the rest of the way to the point of the release. There we saw a completely unblocked mine at it with an estimated 550 gallon per minute flow of bright opaque orange, and he goes on and on. You did not do that. You didn't call them. You didn't communicate with them. You told the media before you told them they wanted to go to the site. You wouldn't do that. And then you had the gall to hand out Standard Form 95 and walk along the river and try to get them to do waiver forms. And you only did that after the president said, we are going to sue the EPA.
Sir,
why did you do that?
Sir, it's my understanding that we did not hand out claims forms. We had a long discussion following that concern, and we are now getting claims.
You are not telling the truth. Here's the quote from the president of the Navajo Nation. Quote, "It was quick to dispatching staff to the Navajo communities to hand out Standard Form 95 and encourage members of the Navajo Nation to fill out forms to expedite settlement of their claims under the Federal Tort Claims Act and apparently to obtain release from members of the Navajo Nation. But this was only after I, again from the president, announced that the Navajo Nation would be suing the EPA." Do you deny that your people were handing out this form?
I do deny that we were going around trying to get anybody to sign these forms. Based on the information I had, that is not correct. Did we supply forms to the Navajo Nation leadership? Absolutely, because it is part of an opportunity for individual claims to be made. It is not a settlement or a release form. But we walk through those issues, and I think there's a much better understanding of the process for claims that the federal government has established, and I'm hoping that we can utilize our ability to work with them to recognize the damage that has been done and to fully account for that damage and to compensate for it. That is part of the process.
Standard Form 95, I encourage the media and everybody to look at it. Quote, "I certify that the amount of claim covers only damages and injuries caused by the incident above and agree to accept said amount in full satisfaction and final settlement of this claim." It is a settlement agreement.
No,
the record reflects that, again, you're totally misleading, totally out of touch, and totally inappropriate in this instance. Now recognize the gentleman. My time has expired. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to give the Administrator a moment to answer your last statement.
The section you just read refers to a final settlement. This is an application to begin a settlement process that can be added to and amended throughout the entire process, and the final settlement requires a settlement. The claimant needs to actually sign off. It was an ability to get started. It was not a final document in any way.
Well, thank you for that, Administrator McCarthy. And I'd like to switch gears for a moment and focus on the extent of the problem of acid mine drainage around the country. It is a problem that my constituents in northeastern Pennsylvania know only too well. There are 65 million gallons of acid mine runoff every day. Here we're talking about a 3 million gallon spill. There's 65 million gallons of acid mine runoff every day flowing into the Lackawanna River compared to that 3 million in the Animas River spill. In case you don't believe it, I'm going to show you pictures of the Lackawanna River on a typical day. This is the Old Forge borehole, which emits 65 million gallons of orange acid mine drainage into the Susquehanna River, which finds its way down to the Chesapeake Bay. Any spill in our rivers is important and needs to be addressed. Here, however, what my local paper published after the Animas spill received so much media and congressional attention was this cartoon by my friend, the political cartoonist John Cole from Scranton. On the left side, it says 3 million gallons of toxic mine waste accidentally dumped into Colorado's Animas River. It's being called an environmental disaster. And then over on the right side, it shows an illustration of the Old Forge borehole, 65 million gallons a day of acid mine runoff. And it says, around here, we'd call it Tuesday afternoon. We understand the problem in northeastern Pennsylvania. The director of the Lackawanna River Corridor Association, my friend Bernie McGurl, explained to me that in northeastern Pennsylvania, quote, Schuylkill, Lackawanna, Luzerne, Dauphin, Northumberland, Columbia, and Carbon counties all have profound mine drainage issues with thousands of miles of streams that are impacted by mine drainage, many of which are totally devoid of aquatic life. Now, nationally, there are over 500,000 abandoned mines. These abandoned mines scar our nation and pollute our waterways. And my understanding is that in 2008, EPA estimated that to clean them up would cost $50 billion. Now, I welcome this newfound interest in water quality in a bipartisan way. But given that enormous sum, $50 billion, Administrator McCarthy, how much do mining companies contribute to cleaning up this mess that they create?
Well, in the hard rock mining industry, it's very difficult for me to honestly estimate that, but on these legacy sites, the contribution is close to zero.
Well, how much are hard rock mining companies charged in royalties for what they extract?
They are not charged any that I'm aware of.
They are not charged.
No, sir.
So now that we've established that mining companies are not contributing to cleaning up their own messes, what are the sources of funding that you have for mine cleanup?
Well, the federal agencies have some resources. They are not as significant as the challenges that we're facing. For EPA, we have an emergency response fund that we utilize, but that's for the entire country, and we have to prioritize that and use our resources wisely.
What can Congress do to help EPA clean up these mines?
Well, we think that the proposal that the President put in, which actually looks to establish a fee on hard rock mining, similar to what we do with coal mining industries, that would be utilized to address these legacy sites, is an appropriate thing to do. And it would be based on a polluter pays principle and provides significantly additional funds for us to at least begin to address these challenges.
Now, for abandoned coal mines, funding comes from coal AML reclamation fees based on coal royalties, correct?
That's correct.
While coal companies do pay royalties that go toward abandoned mine cleanup, they contribute only a small fraction of what we need to deal with the problem. We have to remember that the AML is set to expire in the coming years. And I want to take this moment to urge Congress to turn its attention to reauthorizing the AML so we can continue the important work in reducing the impact of abandoned mines. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record Standard Form 95. Without objection, so ordered. Now I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarthy, the EPA internal review documents of the spill said there's no documentation of flow for the Gold King mine adit available before July 2005, when the adit was discharging about 42 gallons per minute. Then in September of 2005, it was up to 135 gallons per minute. 2006, it increased to 314 gallons per minute. 2009 to 2014, the rate dropped again all the way down to 13 gallons per minute in September of 2014. And according to your staff, it gave our committee staff documentation on September 8th, post-blowout adit discharge is approximately 600 gallons per minute. Is there any new data since September 8th that changes the 600 gallons per minute discharge rate?
I think I have a slightly lower figure, but I'm happy to provide you with that, sir. I don't want to speak when I don't have all the data at my fingertips.
Okay, you were coming to testify, and you don't know if EPA's made it worse since September 8th or made it better.
Well, clearly, my understanding is that it is something in the order of 550 gallons per minute, if that's what you're asking me.
Well, the problem is, and I love a good demonstration, but when we show tea or any other thing, when we're talking about real sludge, the facts are that before the blowout, the discharge rate was 70 gallons per minute. That's 100,000 800 gallons per day then. Now 600, maybe 550, but we're talking about 800 to 900,000 gallons, up 8 or 9 times what it was. That's with the EPA handling. And Ms. McCarthy, I'm just blown away. You indicate that you did not anticipate, the EPA did not anticipate that this type of blowout could occur. Now, when
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. So you just went into it knowing this kind of damage could occur, but not preparing for it.
Well, we went in there specifically because the concern was raised by us and other professionals that there was potentially a pressurized blockage there. We were actually trying to take action that would mitigate that.
Okay, but it never crossed EPA's mind that you may do more damage than you did good?
Of course we tried.
Okay,
very
then
hard to
what
develop a
activity
plan
did
to
you
that.
do to be prepared for when the floodgates flew open and you did this kind of a damage to the environment?
Yeah,
how were you prepared
what
for
we
that
did-
other than with waivers of claim certificates?
No, so we spent a great deal of time with the state of Colorado, with the amicus.
Well, we're going to find out about that from
developing a
Colorado
work plan
because you've
for that.
told us before, at least you testified on July 9th under the Waters of the United States rule that was developed. You said, quote, it is available in the docket. That's what we relied on, both the knowledge and expertise of our staff, the information we received from the public, and comments that the science that's available to us. But on April 27th, Joe Ellen Darcy, Assistant Secretary for the Army for Civil Works, from Major John Peabody, proved that was a false statement, that the 4,000-foot determination was not based on science. You did not have proper evidence of that. And then we had a federal judge, Ralph Erickson, that verified that you didn't. So you come in here and you tell us, oh, we worked with the state of Colorado. It doesn't sound that way once again. And the result is that we continue to have massive damage to the environment. Since you've been at the EPA, how many people or industries, companies have been charged with criminal violations?
I don't have that number, sir.
You have charged plenty of people, right?
We have conducted enforcement activities that we should conduct, yes.
How many people at the EPA are under investigation right now for this massive discharge that you created?
I'm unaware of any criminal investigation, sir.
Well, I guess there's the rub, isn't it?
I,
Your agency is above the law
No, sir.
and all the damage you do to the environment, and you want to be in charge of all the waters of the United States, and you couldn't even figure out to get ready for a possible discharge. I yield back.
we are holding ourselves fully accountable, sir.
Thank the gentleman.
You just wait.
Gentlemen,
She added the question, the answer.
Gentleman's
Who is being held
hold on.
accountable?
Gentleman's time has expired. We're now going to recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Napolitano, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Ms. McCarthy. A lot of questions. First of all, in my subcommittee, I was not privy to any information from EPA, and that I hold a little bit concerning, so please keep that in mind. Excuse me. How many of the companies that you know of that are mines wherever, whether it's gold, silver, coal, are foreign-owned? Do we have any record of that?
I don't have that information.
Do you have any way of being able to tell this committee? Because if some of those companies are foreign-owned, they're making money. They're not being, how would I say, made responsible for anything that they leave behind. They leave it up to the U.S. taxpayer to pick up any kind of remediation. And I think that needs to be part of the answer that we need to look at. In the rest of the United States, and I'm very, very concerned about what happened in Las Animas, but what about the rest of the nation that has these hundreds, maybe thousands of mines? How many of those are close to blowouts? Is there assessments?
I think, well, EPA is only involved in actually a small percentage of those.
Why?
Because the authority to look at these is spread among a number of agencies, and EPA
Can you
generally
break it down so
focuses
that we
on-
have an idea of what the problem really is with some of these mines that may affect the health and welfare of our communities?
We can do our best, but I can tell you that the ones that we follow are the ones on the national priorities list, and the ones where we work with states to address what we consider to be an imminent threat or a need for emergency response. The upper Animas was in that category.
Okay, but I would
That
like to
category.
see if you can answer some of this for the whole committee. And I'm glad Mr. Bishop is worried about fish and wildlife and the endangered species. That's something that is dear and near to the heart of a lot of us. But with that, you're budgeting. How much budget do you require to be able to do a job to maybe look at avoiding what happened at Las Animas?
Well, we just have an environmental fund that allows us to tap that for these
How much
type
is
of
that fund?
response actions. Fiscal year 2015 Superfund remediation action budget is $501 million.
Is that, does it have to be on the Superfund? Does it have to be designated Superfund site?
No, it doesn't. This is for remedial action that we need to take, whether it's on the Superfund list or not.
And you're currently working on how many mines to be able to address the issues?
I'm sorry, I'll have to get back to you.
Would you please, because that would kind of answer some of the questions I have. And then how many other agencies?
Okay.
How many other agencies are involved or should be involved besides Fish and Wildlife, the National Institute of Health for being able to determine the status of the health concerns, CDC? What about BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs? What role do they play in being able to notify Native American tribes? Are they immediate, or do you work with them, or do you get them involved immediately and have tasked them with doing the outreach? And how many other areas do we have that are really concerning in terms of contamination that are cancerous? Lead, arsenic, uranium, and the gold mine, the copper mines. What are the heart minerals that are that are going to affect the health of our nation?
Well, there's at least 161,000 abandoned mines, and while we're talking about ones we know, there are so many that we don't know, and we know we have experience in looking at these mines, and they involve sudden releases like the ones we were talking about here, and the potential for that. There's periodic mine discharges that are impacting headwaters. There's a lot of them.
I'm running out of time, but I want to be sure that my colleague in Pennsylvania, if there is a continuous release, is that one of the areas that EPA may be looking at to be able to help address the issue?
Well, the challenge for us is really there are a lot of these issues. I do not know whether that specific one is on the NPL. I doubt that. I don't know if others
shaking
do.
his head no and behind you, so they don't know.
But when a state wants us to come in and work with them, we do our
But
best
is
to
it
do
only at
that.
the request of a state, or do we have the ability to have you look at a lot of these mines?
No, we make priorities depending upon what we find out and what we're asked to do, but the challenge for us is it's limited. That does not take care of the long-term problem. It takes care of short-term problems.
So what do we need to do to address it in the long
thank
term?
the gentlewoman's
Thank
time.
you.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr.
We now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And let me kind of pick up where Mr. Gohmert, gentleman from Texas, left off on the issue of accountability. If a private company or a corporation or individual dumped 7,500 gallons of toxic chemical into a natural waterway, wouldn't there be a penalty, or wouldn't you hold them accountable?
It all depends on the circumstances, sir. We would hold them accountable.
You would
for
investigate.
cleanup.
Yeah.
Whether or not there'd be a penalty involved would depend on the circumstances.
But someone would be held accountable,
That's correct.
responsible. You would
Yes.
review that.
Yes.
And you do that. That's part of your responsibility. One of the frustrations I think that members of Congress and the American people have is that holding agencies accountable. Now, you've been there since July of 2013. You were there during the spill. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And you are in charge of the agency.
Yes, sir.
Is there an SES individual below you that would, or a deputy that also would be responsible for this, looking at this matter and overseeing it?
I have an assistant administrator.
Okay. And who's that?
Maddie Stanislaus.
Okay. Then you have a regional
That's correct.
is that Sean McGrath?
That's correct.
Okay. And then you have an on-scene EPA.
On-scene coordinators.
Who is that? For the
I do
record?
not know the individual's name.
Okay. And you've conducted some preliminary investigation.
Yes, we've did.
Everything we see, it
internal
looks like
investigation.
there was a mistake. You have a contractor, too, who
Yeah.
EPA was overseeing. Who's being held accountable based on the information that you have so far?
Well, one of the reasons why we asked DOI to do an independent investigation was to make sure that somebody independently looked at that and provided us information so that we could follow up to see if there was
And
any
that's not
lack
complete?
of judgment or lack of oversight or foresight.
That's not complete, that
no,
process?
so that's going to be completed in October, is my
And I want you to tell the committee and report back to the committee who's held responsible. I have reviewed some of the bonuses given to different agencies in the past, and at least historically, EPA has paid some of the biggest performance award. In fact, some of your SES class folks, 64% of them got bonuses. I want to know if there are any recommendations pending for any bonuses for any of these individuals. And that made part of the record in appropriate, I'd like the next 30 days, and that anything pending. And then also, I want for the long-term record to report back to the committee the findings and who's held accountable. I think that's the least we can do. Yeah. And then what action is taken about to those individuals who have done this damage to the environment and caused untold damage to the people sitting behind you who we're going to hear from. And then the other thing, too, is the estimate of the cost for getting this all back to regular order.
I'm happy.
Do you have any
to
estimate?
provide that. In terms of what it would take, I know that we've already spent somewhere upwards of $10 million. We expect that will go up considerably over time. But again, the challenge we have is to look at the upper Animas River, because while there may be some continued discharge from the Gold King mine, there continues to be a much larger discharge from that area.
So $10 million. Again, all I think...
That was just the emergency,
I think
the immediate response.
This is a reasonable request that we hold
Absolutely.
You and others accountable who are responsible for this. Again, it can be based on the independent findings, but we're looking at $10 million of costs and a disruption to many parties. Is that correct?
I fully recognize, and I expect to be held accountable, and that's the job of this committee, and I fully respect it, and I will cooperate in any way I can.
Finally, I got just a second here. We have pending and some court issues dealing with the redefinition of navigable waters and the
Yes.
rule. What's the status, very briefly, of that? Is the rule going into place? Is it on hold? And what are you doing?
The rule is actually being implemented, except, I believe, in the 13 states where there was a decision by a judge to actually issue a preliminary injunction. So in all but those 13 states is being fully implemented as we're sitting here, yes.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask Administrator McCarthy, most of the cleanup of hazardous waste from abandoned and inactive hard rock mines like Gold King is carried out by the EPA and state government agencies. The hazardous waste at these abandoned mines was caused, however, by the activities of mining companies, not EPA or state governments. Correct? Is that correct?
That is correct.
It was the mining companies that made the mess, but those companies are not the ones cleaning it up. Do mine owners or operators have any legal obligation to clean up the pollution they leave behind?
It's my understanding that there is some liability in some cases, but consistently there are, in these legacy sites, the owners are absent from the discussion.
Why is EPA involved at all in the cleanup of inactive mines like Gold King?
Well, we were there because of the concern of a potential blowout and the concern of the water quality that was being consistently degraded from the mine seepage that was entering into the Cement Creek and the Animas River. The Cement Creek literally has, as far as I know, no fish whatsoever, and for miles downstream in the Animas, the fish population has almost gone down to zero. And so EPA has been looking at this as a potential NPL site, a Superfund site, and short of that, looking at how we coordinate with the state and with the local stakeholders to address the challenge short of issuing a decision to put it on the NPL site.
So there are constant pollutants seeping into the river from the mine. It's been going on for years, apparently.
In large discharges. There is no question that the Animas has been struggling, but our hope was that we could continue to work together and get that quality shifted into another direction and get that quality continually improved instead of degraded.
And of course, today's hearing, and you don't have to respond to this, but today's hearing is to blame the EPA for the callous disregard of mining companies not being good stewards of our environment. And I think it's a farce what we are conducting here with you. Let me, I understand that for abandoned and inactive coal mines, there is a dedicated funding source for mine waste cleanup, which is derived from fees collected on each ton of coal mined in this country. Is there a similar funding source for hard rock mine remediation?
There is not, but that is what the President's fiscal year 16 proposed budget is suggesting should happen.
Are mine owners financing the cleanup of the mine waste that pollutes the land and rivers for decades after the mines cease operations?
In most cases, no, sir.
Oh, my. Oh, my. Do you believe the President's proposal, if enacted, would help provide necessary resources for cleaning up abandoned mines?
I do, sir.
Well, it's about time that we as a Congress get serious about responsible parties and who's responsible for making this mess and cleaning it up. It's the same thing with radioactive waste left all over the landscape, and nobody wants to take responsibility for it. And yet you want to dump on the EPA today. I think this is, we should be ashamed of ourselves. We should be ashamed of what we're doing in this committee today. You know, the current owner of Gold King Mine, Todd Hennis, told CNN in August, and I quote, "I've been predicting for the last 14 years that the situation would continue getting worse and worse. I foresaw disaster, and that has been borne out." Well, why are taxpayers responsible for cleaning up abandoned mines while owners can sit back and do nothing? I mean, that's the question we need to be asking as a committee. Why don't they have any responsibility when they made the mess? And you know, we all have a responsibility to be good stewards of the environment, but in this case, we let them one party off. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I hope he has the guts to stand here and ask the President of the Navajo Nation if what we're doing here today is a farce.
Well, and I
If
hope
I
we
did-
have the guts as a Congress to actually try to clean it up and stop pointing fingers.
Well,
Now, that's what I hope.
we'll see if you ask the Navajo Nation. It's a farce. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Fleming, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarthy, in Louisiana we have a saying that the chef should occasionally taste her own sauce. What do I mean by that? I want to bring up a different issue, but it is connected. Are you familiar with the Camp Minden issue relative to the EPA? It was handled out of Dallas.
Yes, I am.
Okay. What happened was there was a big explosion in 2012 as a result of propellant, this explosive that had accumulated over 15 million pounds, and it was a lack of oversight by the U.S. Army over this private company that allowed this to happen. So we had the problem with how are we going to get rid of this 15 million pounds, and of course EPA became involved. But we were shocked that the EPA, first of all, said, well, we're not sure. I guess, you know, the local state will probably have to pay for it. We finally got money from the Superfund. But then after analysis, the EPA said, we're just going to burn it in the open, which means all of these toxic substances, arsenic, lead, whatever, going into the air and into our ground and into our water. Now, I think back about the coal industry that's been more or less severely hampered, if not shut down, because of CO2 emissions, which certainly is not as toxic, if toxic at all, as arsenic and lead. Coal-fired plants being shut down, and now we've got the waters of the U.S. But I was shocked, and the local community was shocked, when the EPA came in and said, we see nothing wrong with open burn of 15 million pounds of propellant. And we pushed back on it. We had many hearings locally. We finally got the EPA to back down and to allow closed burning, which is a more costly procedure. But it really seems to me ironic that the EPA, which can provide huge fines on private industry and individuals, can actually put people in jail through criminal activities of pollution, would be so cavalier in this case. And in fact, only because of pushback from the community did we get the EPA to do the right thing. The EPA was clearly trying to take the shortcuts and avoid the cost. And then you look at this situation. Incompetently, the EPA allowed, of course, this toxic spill, this water that is now in our environment. It'll never be cleaned up completely. So I guess what I'm saying is it seems like to me there's a double standard. The EPA is not holding itself to the same standards that you hold individuals and industry itself to.
Well, sir, let me respond on Camp Minden, because I actually couldn't be more pleased of the outcome, and it took a long time to get there, and I do appreciate the way in which the state intervened on that, as well as all of the elected officials.
Yes.
So it was an option that was chosen by the DOD. It was not an uncontrolled burn, but I think we've ended up in a much better place, and one that the community really participated wonderfully well in, and I couldn't be more pleased. Now, in terms of this effort, you know, I want you to understand, and I'm sure that you do, that EPA's job was to try to support an effort to address what we knew was almost a likely inevitability of a blowout at that mine, as well as knowing that the river was being damaged each and every day as a result of the mining in the upper Animas. Should that spill have occurred? No. Are we going to figure out whether we could have done something about it, done something different?
Well, but here's my question, Ms. McCarthy. I appreciate that. My question is that private citizens, Americans, and companies are held to a high standard, and the punishments are severe. But we're not hearing today of any punishments or even reduction in pay or even firings that are going to occur because of this incompetency. So that's the point I'm making, is a double standard. Yes, I know you're doing the best you can and so forth. But one agency after another, the VA and now the EPA, has these responsibilities and these broad powers that no single company has to inflict damage, to inflict severe punishment and penalties on Americans, and yet we don't find anything within the agency where the decision makers and the people with all this power have any accountability for that.
So when a spill like this happens, the accountability is for the person who actually needs to take responsibility for that spill to do so, which we had. And the second level is, how did it happen, and was there activity that should have been done differently? Is it criminal? Is it civil? Is it negligent? That's what we're looking at now, and we're independently having that done. And I will live with those consequences, and I will appropriately take action.
Well, we'll certainly want to hear who those decision
Thank-
makers were and what happened to them. Thank you. Now yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Tsongas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Administrator McCarthy. This has not been a simple conversation for you. EPA is a lot of questions have been raised, and I think on both sides of the aisle, I think we were all dismayed to see the horrific, the way in which the river was so impacted. I happen to come from a district that's rooted in the Industrial Revolution, where rivers have run various different colors depending on the dye that was cast into them at the end of the manufacturing day. So we're all very concerned about how we care for our rivers. And obviously, this bill does warrant an investigation. But I do think I have to give you credit for being willing to be here and answer appropriately the questions that we all have. So I want to thank you for it. And I think it's somewhat disingenuous to compare this with a private spill. As we've heard, you all have, first of all, proactively made a decision to investigate yourselves through the Inspector General and the EPA and through the Bureau of Reclamation, as well as doing an investigation. And as you've said, you will accept the outcome of that and take appropriate actions. And what is also different here is that this is a legacy site. Mine operators who benefited from the various metals that were in those grounds have subsequently abandoned them and left an environmental mess. And we have a difficult time holding them accountable. And you have said that you were there because of concern with a blowout, the possibility of a blowout, and the degraded water quality. And you've also noted there are 161,000 such abandoned mines in which these issues present the EPA with a challenge of how best to fix them. So you've also talked about that given that long list, you create a national priorities list. And I'm curious and think it would really be helpful for you to explain how you prioritize given the vast number of mines that have the great potential to pose such harm to our environment.
Well, we actually prioritize it in a couple of different ways. We have factors that we consider in terms of what deserves to be on the national priorities list. In this particular case, we started back in the mid-90s looking at this and actually suggesting that it be on the national priorities list. But what we found at that point in time was that the communities in the states were actually getting together an Animas River stakeholder group who insisted that they could do a good job at addressing this issue without taking that measure. They actually did a good job. Up until 2005, that river was getting cleaner all the time. But there was a turnaround in the river. And that turnaround meant that we were getting a lot more discharges. We see fish populations degrading. That's why we were continuing to look at it as of 2008 to see if we should look at the upper creek, the Cement Creek, as the section that we would articulate and look at for the national priorities list. And out of that discussion came a collaborative effort with the state in the Animas River Watershed Group to actually look at, is that what Animas River Stakeholder Group, to take a look at what we could do, and that's when the concern of a blowout arose, and we started working on a work plan that was very public, went to public hearings about what EPA could do to try to address that issue while people looked at the long-term challenge and thought about how best to do it. That's the history of this site. It is a long one, and obviously today not a successful one.
And so the local community, how did the communities initiate their interaction with the EPA? What was the process by which that took place?
Actually, we've been working with them since at least the mid-'90s is how far back it goes. And it was they pulled together this stakeholder group that was really post people who worked in the mines. It was public citizens. It was local leaders. It was state representatives. EPA helped to participate in some of those. It really just became a collaborative effort, knowing that they had a large problem and that we had to work together. And that became the tone of the discussion. EPA was not there, to work as a lone entity. It was there to share ideas, to bring our mining experts to the table, to work with the state of Colorado and folks who knew the area better than we did, and to identify what the work should happen. And that was that work plan that we were working under at the time that this spill occurred. It was fully developed with everybody's input, with public hearings. Did we underestimate the potential of the spill at the site? Did we do something we shouldn't? Those are the issues that the independent review will give a fresh eye to. But it wasn't because we didn't try, and it wasn't because we weren't working collaboratively.
And was the mine operator, the former mine operator, a part of any of those discussions?
I thank the gentlewoman. Sorry, the gentlewoman's time has expired. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Administrator McCarthy, thank you for being here. Before I go back to some responsibility questions, let me get to something I think is practical, especially since snowy weather, winter, may indeed be coming to this very soon, this area. It's expected that snow and wintry conditions will hit the upper Animas area as soon as early October, which will impact the testing, recovery, and remediation efforts, I would assume. What steps is EPA taking to prepare for these conditions?
We're looking at two efforts. Primarily, one is we're looking at a long-range monitoring plan that we're about to put out in draft to all of the groups that we're working with in the area, including the state and local and county officials and the tribes. And we'll hopefully get some long-range monitoring plan agreed to that will consider the challenges that we're facing with the winter months coming up.
Can you guarantee that you won't abandon the site during the winter?
We will not abandon the site. The second thing we're doing is taking a look at whether we need to enhance the treatment process right at the site. Now, that's not the full remediation that the upper Animas needs, but we're looking at that issue in collaboration with the state and local communities and the tribes as well.
How many other sites similar to the Gold King is EPA currently working at or involved with right now?
Well, it depends on, well, first of all, I have actually issued a memo holding off on continued work on similar sites until we see what went wrong. What are we going to see from the independent from this site so that we can learn those lessons and ensure it doesn't happen again? My understanding is that we have at this point identified 10 sites that we actually have put work on hold that seem similar enough that we want to just monitor that situation as long as there isn't an imminent hazard. We're waiting on that October review to take a look at it.
Isn't it true that the contractor whose work caused or contributed to the disaster is still working at the Gold King site?
Yes, that's true, sir.
Do you think the contractor that played such a huge role in this disaster should be working at the site?
Well, I think one of the challenges that we face is that our on-scene coordinator was at that site, and they were overseeing that work, and the contractor, as far as my understanding, was doing the work dictated under the work plan. They are a very experienced contractor. We have no information that says that they had done anything wrong. We certainly know that the work
just
plan
a big yellow
sufficient.
plume.
Well, that was a result of obviously actions that we took. It was unanticipated. It was a decision we made with mining officials, ourselves, and the states and others. But we need to look at what went wrong. But they are actually actively working.
Were they given a $500,000 additional? I guess we wouldn't call it a bonus, but $500,000 additional to clean up the mess they made?
I'm not aware of what sums are, but if you're referring to the fact that they were the first on site and the most able to contain the spill, and to construct the treatment facilities right at the spill location and to contain it. They were there. They helped to do that. What that accounted for in terms of time and money, I don't know.
Well,
It's not
I'd
as
appreciate
if-
you checking into that, because it seems
I
they're
will do that.
indicated that this company, this contractor, that was highly responsible for the disaster, they were there, and they were able to be there as quickly because they're the ones that were doing it and caused this spill to take place. But it appears that they received an additional $500,000 on top of their contract to now do the cleanup for the mess that they made. That, to me, doesn't sound appropriate.
Sure, I'm happy to provide you the information on what other compensation may have been given to this contractor, but I also want to reiterate that EPA is the one that is taking full responsibility for this, and DOI will tell us whether mistakes were made at the site or whether there was any misjudgment or work that we didn't do in terms of due diligence.
Well, let me get to that, and I appreciate you've said that numerous times, and we
right.
appreciate any entity that says the buck does stop here. Tell the committee in what ways EPA failed and bears the blame in this case.
That we're going to wait for the DOI review to
Well,
tell us that.
What do you think? I mean, we can read reports.
Yeah. Well,
What do you think?
Yeah, there's certainly already lessons learned. Do I think we were as good as we should be on notification? No, I don't think so. I realize that we had 3 different regional offices involved. We had 120 miles to account for before it even hit the Navajo Nation lands, and we should have been more on top of that, and we should be looking at that. That's why we've already demanded that those actions take. Did we work effectively to get our response actions up? I think our response actions have been good. Can they always improve? We'll look at ways in which we can do that. So we're trying to get the lessons learned here, but one of the big open questions I think that you've raised in this committee, and I'm sure we'll be talking about again, is how did the spill happen? Did we look at this in a way that wasn't due diligent enough? Did we have the right people there looking at
And I think that goes back to the contract
Thank the gentleman.
as well. So
Thank the
I thank the
gentleman.
chairman.
Time has expired. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarthy, normally when I see an old friend at a wake or a funeral, I say, it's good to see you, just sorry to see you under these circumstances. So it is good to see you, just sorry to see you under these circumstances.
Does it feel like that to you, too?
Yeah. Well, I love my EPA in my region. I have to say,
Thank you.
I want to say some good things here. They're very responsive, very conscientious. And I appreciate the work that they do. But this is not the EPA's finest hour. I think you would admit that. And I actually have a connection to this whole incident. I used to live in Farmington, New Mexico. I actually was an iron worker there and lived on the Navajo reservation. I was a guest of the Navajo Nation for a couple of years. I know how the tribe is intensely invested, not only financially, but spiritually in their land. And I was honored to be their guest for a couple of years. What troubles me here is that, we often see how the EPA works. They've got a almost maddening, hyper-technical compliance regime for businesses, and that is often the case. And yet, in this case, internally, it seems that the EPA abandoned all that hyper-technical compliance in its own application of its actions. What are we going to do? What are we going to do here to help the Navajo recover here? What are we going to do to get this straightened out and cleaned up? Can we get a promise from you that you are all in on this, and that you're going to be as relentless in cleaning up this spill and this accident as you have been in some cases where you come down on some industries that we're all aware of that found themselves in a similar situation? we need that type of guarantee. We need you to be all in on this. We need you to be relentless in terms of fixing your mistake, what happened here. I mean, albeit I know there were good intentions here, but good Lord, this is a beautiful area, and now it's damaged extensively, and we need your help to set this thing right.
Well, I think you know from my forthrightness about taking responsibility for this that we are all in. Is it extraordinarily difficult and upsetting for the Navajo? There is no question about it. I recognize that. We're working to try to figure out what we can do together to resolve the circumstances here. But I know that it's going to take a really long time. And this is not EPA's final, best, what did you say? Finest hour. But I am here to tell you that we are taking responsibility, and we will do that in the long term, and we will find a way to get to the Animas River and the San Juan in a way that takes care of the underlying fundamental challenge we have here. But I want to say that this was not a compliance issue. This was a response action to deal with basically contamination that EPA wasn't the responsible party for. But am I excusing our role in this? Did our actions actually contribute to this? If we did anything wrong, we will be fully accountable for that. But in the meantime, we have to make good to the Navajo, to the Southern Ute, to the Ute Mountain Ute, and to the states that are involved in this. There is no question about it.
Yeah, as I said before, there's a spiritual, not almost spiritual, there's a spiritual dimension to this for the Navajo and the Ute as well. And I lived not too far from Shiprock, and there's like I said, there's an intense investment here on the part of these tribes. This is their homeland. Sometimes we forget that they are a sovereign nation, and we have a huge responsibility here to fix what we have exacerbated. Maybe we didn't create it, but we certainly exacerbated the problem here, and we need to step up in a big way and meet our obligations. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarthy, the EPA posted videos to its website taken by on-site contractors of the spill emerging out of the mine as it happened. I think we saw a clip of that earlier. On September 9th, EPA Assistant Administrator Matthew Stanislaus testified before the House Science Committee on these videos, and I think we have a clip of that testimony.
That show the blowout as it happens. According to the website, and I want you to look over on the far right-hand side there, EPA removed profanity contained in the audio of the videos and obscured visible license plates for privacy purposes, and then it ends with this: EPA did not edit the videos in any other way. So, first question for you, Mr. Stanislaus, is the statement I just read from EPA's website accurate?
It is accurate.
Okay, great. Do you have any reason to believe that it would not be accurate?
I do not.
Okay. Here is video footage of the early stages of the Gold King mine blowout that was obtained by the Science Committee. Let's have video number one.
We're digging really high. Is he going to go close it out? What do we do now?
Well, the next video is the exact same footage that EPA posted on its website, but the last few seconds of the audio has been removed to prevent the viewers from hearing the team on the ground saying, "What do we do now?" Let's have the second video.
We're digging really high. Is he going to go close it out?
I'm going to ask they stop it here. Obviously,
So,
the tape was heavily
You
edited.
said that you
Obviously, the tape was heavily edited. This was a week ago when you were when your agency was giving misinformation to the Congress. You've had a week, and I'm going to ask you again: is this editing and concealing of videos EPA's idea of transparency and accountability?
No, sir. That originally posted video should not have been redacted. When it was pointed out to us, we have posted the unredacted version on our website.
You understand the concern here, and there are two basically. One is the fundamental competence of the EPA, and I think that speaks for itself in this incident. The other is the double standard that seems to be at work here. You testified earlier in this hearing that you're not required to consult with the National Fish and Wildlife Service because you didn't intend to cause the spill. The chairman pointed out there was a company that accidentally spilled 7,500 gallons, 1/4 of 1% of what the EPA spilled. You went after those people viciously and got 6 criminal indictments. You're sending people to jail over that. Some other poor guy in Alaska operating a backhoe accidentally causes a 1,500-gallon spill. That's 5/100ths of 1% of the spill that EPA. You sent him to prison. No criminal charges are being filed against EPA officials, are there?
Well, I think that we're waiting for the Department of the Interior to actually produce their report. If they identify criminal or administrative
well,
concerns,
you understand the
those will be
skepticism of the agency investigating itself.
No,
you say you're holding yourselves accountable, that you are going to take full responsibility. Does that mean that you're resigning?
No, sir. It
Well,
means that
have you asked any of your subordinates to resign?
No, sir. Not
Have you docked anybody's pay?
No, sir.
Have you yelled at anybody?
Well, maybe.
Sir,
I am taking accountability for the spill and issues around that, but we're working as closely as we can to independently get this looked at, and we will be holding people fully accountable.
One more question.
To the
There was a blog entry reporting on this, pointing out that after the initial spill, things went from bad to worse for those relying on the river. For example, Navajo farmers unable to use water from the river were provided with emergency water reserves from the EPA. Unfortunately, this water was contaminated too, prompting another attempted EPA cover-up. According to The Guardian, EPA officials originally told Navajo leaders the individual reporting the contamination was, quote, unstable and deliberately, quote, agitating in an attempt to undermine the agency. The Navajo leader took the EPA at its word, at least until he observed the pollution for himself. Is this true?
Actually, what I understand is that those tanks were tested by the Navajo and found to be clean. It was drinking water put into fully cleaned tanks. That's my understanding of the situation. There was definitely concern. And do I think the level of mistrust contributed to that? And do I understand why? Given EPA's responsibility here, I absolutely do. And it is going to take a long time, I think, before anybody begins, at least in the Navajo, to be able to trust our relationship again. Do I regret that? Yeah. But I'm working with them. If they want third-party review of everything we do, we're trying to identify how we do this. We will rebuild this trust. But damage has been done beyond what happened to that river, and it's going to take a long time to repair that. But I am going to do the best I can to make sure that happens.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Lowenthal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of the chairs for holding this hearing, and thank you, Administrator McCarthy, for coming, for being so forthright, for not trying to duck tough issues, and for being accountable. But I think that we still have to go back to some of the points that were made before, that the Gold King mine spill tragedy reminds the nation of the reality and that we have, quotes, a creeping killer in the shadows. There are up to 500,000 abandoned mines nationwide. Many of these mines are dangerous. They're discharging toxic, acidic mine waste into our surface waters. And if we don't do anything to properly clean them up and close them down, we will have more disasters. That's it. I mean, I think that's what I've learned after being here. So I'm very sorry it took this tragedy. And I'm sorry for some of the actions that have been taken, but I am really glad that we're focusing our attention on what is frequently ignored or forgotten. And that to help address this problem that's been of abandoned mines, I point out again that Ranking Member Grijalva, many of my colleagues and myself have introduced legislation that would secure funding to clean up and properly close down these dangerous mines. H.R. 963, the Hard Rock Mining Reform and Reclamation Act, would also provide assistance to mining communities and ensure a fair return to taxpayers for extracting public minerals. I would like to urge all my colleagues here today to become co-sponsors of this important legislation and help us to prevent the next abandoned mine contamination release before it happens. Now, Administrator McCarthy, these may seem like obvious questions. I have some. Some have already been gone over, but I'd like to get them on the record. The EPA, as I understand, was partnering with the state of Colorado on the Gold King mine project. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We were cooperating with them, yes, and coordinating our efforts.
And why was the EPA in Colorado working with the state on the Gold King mine as well as on other mines in the area?
Because of the degradation of the water quality in the Animas River and the San Juan River that was being contributed to by these 400 mines in the upper Animas, as well as the threat of a blowout at the mine, which was a very big concern.
And how did that happen? Why were we in this situation?
It's a long history, but those mines have really not been actively worked since 1991. Since that time, there has been a buildup of water in the system. Some of the mines in the area have been plugged, which shift the hydrology, which create a backup. And in the Gold King mine itself, it had some collapses in the mine, which made it inaccessible. So we were trying to get a handle on a situation that was growing increasingly dangerous.
Then the question to me is, again, to clear up, why were the original mining operators, why did they not clean up this, and who will be paying now for this cleanup?
My understanding is that for the most part, they're not obligated to, and what we use in terms of our resources are taxpayer dollars. They're given to us, appropriated by Congress.
So it's the taxpayers that will be paying for this. And not only this, as we look into the future, we have as you've already stated, we have incomplete data as to where abandoned mines are, what toxins they're releasing into our waterways, and we are currently unable to adequately pay for the cleanup of these abandoned mines. So it seems to me if we take a larger view of the Gold King mine disaster and we move forward with legislation, that something like the Hard Rock Mining Reform and Reclamation Act would provide the funding for cleaning up these abandoned mine sites. Is that not so? That something like this would be appropriate?
It would certainly help, sir.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Lummis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director McCarthy, for being here. Let me set up a scenario. A number of years ago, there was a water treatment plant that was actually downstream that was treating the water from this mine. About 10 years ago, there was a storm. It was damaged. It needed to be replaced. A decision was made not to replace it, not to treat the water that was coming down. Next, EPA and the state of Colorado create a plan to clean up the mine rather than just treat the water going downstream. So they block off the flow of water from drain pipes in the mine. When you plugged the drain pipes, the water built up into a huge wall of water in the mine. And that was a significant cause of the blowout last month. So rather than replace the treatment plant downstream that was providing cleaned up water to the Utes and the Navajos, the decision was made, no, let's not treat it. Let's block the drains, store the water in the mine, and when it built up, it spilled out. It goes downstream. Then Bureau of Reclamation dumps a ton of water downstream that should have been available to the tribes to irrigate with and to keep water flows such that endangered species can remain viable. To me, this looks like a chain of events that was foreseeable and avoidable. Now, it was the Gold King Mine's owner that asserted that the buildup of water in the mine, when you plug the drains, was a contributor to the blowout. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
I have a slightly different understanding of the history here and the issue, so I don't want to pick apart the issue, but I do think we need to have a conversation about it because I don't quite see the same history here. But I do know there's been many decisions. I want you to understand EPA's role here was we did not participate in decisions about who was responsible for what, where blockages should be approved or not approved, or what to do with the treatment facility that you identified. We came in simply trying to work with the state and the local stakeholders to identify what we could do to alleviate problems along the way.
Okay, so now that we know that the Southern Ute tribe has already spent at least $170,000 responding to the spill, who's going to reimburse them?
Actually, there's two processes here, and the reimbursement process is handled under the CERCLA, and basically it's a memorandum of agreement we need to reach. I was just checking to see if that's been done with the responsible parties who have been helping us, and that is a routine reimbursement process that we'll be able to take care of. So those relationships with both the tribes and the states are fairly routine for us because they act as emergency responders with us. The Southern Utes have been incredible and actually incredibly diligent in being embedded in our command center, working on this. Their professionalism has been wonderful, so we are going to make sure that they are properly reimbursed for their expenses. The second process are the claims process, which is not really a reimbursement issue. It's what damages have occurred, and we use the Federal Claims Tort Act in order to process those claims.
Now, how does the Federal Tort Claims Act help the Navajo? They lost a huge amount of irrigating water, which can have long-term devastating effects if drought continues and they don't have the water now or in the future. How can they be made whole?
Right. There's two things that are happening here as well. One is that we are talking to the Navajo about how they get reimbursed for the work that they have done. It has been extensive as well. And so we need to work with the president as well as the Navajo Nation EPA to reimburse for their expenses. The second issue also is the claims process, if individuals want to participate in that process as well. I think I want to make sure that we're all aware that the reimbursement process is quite different. While it's costly, it's easy to do. We have processes in place for that. The third issue is that we are developing a long-term monitoring plan, and we need to make sure that that plan allows engagement of the tribes and the states and the counties in that effort, and we need to have a stream of funding to support that effort as well.
My time has expired, but Mr. Chairman, might I ask that I have an opportunity to meet with you, Director McCarthy, about what you and I perceive as a different scenario with regard to the cause and effect, the chain of events that led to this.
I will have my staff work with you before.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Beyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Administrator McCarthy, I'd like to thank you for sitting here patiently and capably answering all of these questions. And I'd also like to thank Representative Lummis for raising the whole issue of the bulwarks and changing the hydrology in the mountain, because that seems to be what we've missed all along, is that water was draining responsibly, being treated, and when the bulwarks went in through a consent decree, everything changed. And there's a big problem still out there. And I'm just sort of amazed that all these people, all this attention to attack the EPA over a completely accidental release of 3 million gallons of mined wastewater when 330 million gallons of acid river drainage are flowing into Cement Creek and Animas River every year. Because 3 million gallons on August 5th, and this same watershed gets 3 million gallons every 3 or 4 days. We've heard today that there's at least 161,000 hard rock abandoned mines around the country. The U.S. Forest Service estimates 5,000 to 10,000 miles of rivers and streams contaminated with acid mine drainage just from hard rock abandoned mine lands located on USFS lands. So it seems to me the huge elephant in this room is all of the water drainage from these mines, not the relatively small spill of only 3 million gallons on August 5th. The chairman said this is one of the worst spills we've ever had. I'm not sure the facts support that claim. 1975, 50,000 tons of tailings poured into the Animas River, turning the river the color of aluminum paint. In 78, the Sunnyside mine, 500 million gallons into the Animas. That's 167 times what went in on that one day. And those are just the Animas River, just spills all over the country. So we keep coming back to accountability. And I like to look at process. What was the process by which this decision was made? There's in the testimony before, we hear about the EPA and the state of Colorado meeting with the Animas River Stakeholders Group. In August 4th, they began excavation above where water is seeping into the adit. But what comes back again and again with the Colorado Division of Reclamation, Mine and Safety, the EPA, and the contractor is that the mistake was that someone determined that the adit had low or no pressure.
Yes.
Or, quote, the underestimation of the water pressure in the Gold King mine workings is believed to be the most significant factor relating to that blowout. Is it going to be possible to identify the person or group of people who made that faulty determination? And should they then be fired, or their pay docked, or yelled at, or... Because that was the heart of the matter.
That was one of the key findings of our internal review, and I'm sure that's one of the key areas in which the Department of the Interior are going to look. What we do know is that same review identified the factors that they considered to make a judgment. And when I say they, it was both, the Colorado Division of Reclamations and Mines and Safety was with us making those determinations on the site. And they were looking at factors that they could see to see whether or not there was pressure buildup at the Gold King mine based on that day and that evaluation. They made a judgment that turned out to be wrong. Whether or not they did due diligence in making that or missed factors that they should have looked at, that's what the Department of the Interior is hopefully going to be able to advise us. And we will follow up, and they will be held accountable if there were mistakes made, if they could have avoided this, if they forgot to look at something or made a judgment that wasn't based on profound and good engineering and science.
Thank you. I read the President of the Navajo Nation's long and very detailed testimony to be offered later, and I'm sure you have too, Madam Administrator. Is there, and obviously he points out not just concerns about the 3 million gallons, but everything that's coming in the years to come and how the EPA will deal with that, what the Navajo Nation and its farmers and its people will need. Is there any reason to think that the August 5th spill was anything more than the trigger for all of this attention and partnership between the EPA and the Navajo Nation?
I think it was, it has raised visibility of these issues in a way that I'm hoping something good can come out of this so that we'll be better off in terms of how we manage these sites moving forward. But we've been working with the Navajo for years, and we will continue to do that. And we will address the concerns that they've identified as best we can.
Because even before the August 5th spill, most of these things were just as relevant for their farmers, for their water supply, for the spirituality of their land.
We now know that the water is now at pre-event conditions, So, but that doesn't mean that the Animas and the San Juan are at a point where they need to be in terms of their water quality and the protection of the sediment, so that we're not experiencing the fluctuations that we're seeing now.
I thank the gentleman for his time. Time has expired. We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I think there's a clear double standard of how EPA polices itself and with regard to how you police private enterprises with regard to this. Gentleman from Arizona has been a leader on this issue for Natural Resources Committee. I'd like to yield to balance my time to him.
Ms. McCarthy, in yesterday's hearing in front of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, when asked whether the government should be held to the same standards as it requires of the public and the private sector, you stated that, and I quote, actually a higher standard would be quite appropriate. Do you still believe today that a higher standard for government would be quite appropriate?
I do.
Thank you.
We have a public responsibility that's larger than what I think the private sector has, yes.
So I would like to highlight and submit for the congressional record a Wall Street Journal article from September 9th written by a former EPA employee. In the article, Bill Wyrum states, and I quote, a facility in Charleston, West Virginia that was been previously brought up accidentally spilled roughly 7,500 gallons of toxic chemicals into the local waterway. The EPA's recent discharge of toxic water was many times larger. Yet the agency went after the company with everything it had. End quote. Should the Department of Justice or an independent investigator go after the EPA with everything it has?
When we get the final report to understand what happened, I would expect DOJ to pay attention to that, and I will pay attention to it as well.
Would the Inspector Generals be involved in that application?
Yeah, the Inspector General is also looking at doing an independent review, yes.
Former EPA employee Wyrum also references an incident that occurred during the Clinton administration where a railroad supervisor overseeing a quarry project hired a contractor who accidentally struck a pipeline with a backhoe and contaminated about 1,500 gallons of river water. Though the supervisor, Hannah, was off duty at the time of the incident and had subcontracted the work, the EPA pursued criminal charges against him, and he was sentenced to 6 months in prison because he was ultimately responsible for the safety on the site. You have said that the EPA and you are ultimately responsible for this spill, and you take personal responsibility of this incident, correct?
So the only correction I would make is the Department of Justice is the one that pursues criminal actions.
Okay.
Yes.
Since you believe in parity and a higher standard for government, someone should, from the EPA, go to jail for this incident then. We're making apples to apples.
I am not at all aware that there is negligence or that we didn't do due diligence, and those are the things that the Department of the Interior would indicate.
I would beg to differ. I mean, we knew that there was a problem in here, and we should have alerted everybody along these lines, and I think the chairman of the committee from that standpoint. What actions would the EPA take against a private company who is responsible for a spill of this magnitude?
We actually would be doing exactly the same thing with that company at this stage and looking to independently identify whether or not there was any negligent or criminal activity that led to this. That's exactly the same process we're going through today.
Okay. Now, when the spill was reported to the National Response Center at 12:27 on August 5th, the caller repeatedly emphasized how important it was to notify downstream users who would be affected by the contaminated plume headed towards them. The message was relayed to the EPA. Why is it that the state of New Mexico, the Southern Ute Tribe, and the Navajo Nation all found out about the spill from sources, not the EPA, who caused the incidents in the first place?
It was part of our contingency plan that we always use to take advantage of local information so that there is appropriate notification. Whether or not it was as quick as it could be, I don't know, but that was an appropriate way in which to notify.
Well, so you were notified. Is how hard it would be to pick up a phone?
Well, we have a whole stream. This is not, it's not us individually deciding who to call. There is a contingency plan for notification that's developed with the states, with the local communities, and that's what we initiate. This is not done on the fly. This is a plan that was developed with everybody's input.
Obviously, as a CEO, it failed. It failed miserably. It was way delayed. You have representatives that will testify according to that, the Navajo Nation, the Utes. I want to first move forward a little bit. This lack of trust that's now been instilled within the tribes. How can you expect states and tribes to have trust and faith in your agency to clean up this mess if they can't rely simply on being informed about what's going on? You talk about collaboration, but it shows a very poor respect. And I want to ask one more question before you answer, because I'm running out of time.
Okay.
Why is it so difficult? I know the Southern Utes were on there, For tribes in the states to have seats at the table at the EPA's Incident Command Center, having open lines of communication, or get questions answered about health and sediment impacts. Because I know they are. Well, I look over at the President of the Navajo Nation. This could have been dramatically averted. So I want to know why there's so much reluctancy in those applications.
Actually, there is no reluctance to have the tribes involved to the extent that they want to. They actually were involved in our Incident Command Center. The Southern Utes were there and embedded.
And the Navajo?
We had
And the
11
Navajo?
people embedded in their Incident Command Center and other activities on the tribes.
Something seriously went wrong in this application. And as a CEO, I hope that you would review that. Thank you,
sir.
All right, we're now under resource rules, which means we've got a second panel that's been sitting for 2 hours waiting to be heard. We're going to move this as quickly through, which means your 5 minutes. I'm going to gavel you down at the end of it. For your answers, if it comes in 5 minutes, you're in the middle of a sentence, I'm going to stop you. For the rest of the members, don't wait until there's 10 seconds left before you ask her a question. Give her a fair chance to do this. But we are going to keep the 5-minute rule and get along so we can get the other panel in here. Delegate Norton, you are next up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I can see something beneficial that came out of this tragic accident, and of course, you've taken responsibility. I congratulate you on the rapid cleanup. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. But the benefit that has come is that it's focused us on mine leaking, and I'd ask the chairman to put into the record an editorial from the Salt Lake Tribune entitled Editorial Chaffetz and Bishop owe us real answers on EPA failure, not another Benghazi. So your taking responsibility is very important. Perhaps it's a model for what ought to happen here. I understand that that there may be as many, that while there's no federal government data, there may be as many as 500,000 abandoned mines. Are they orphans out there? Nobody takes responsibility for them, the state, the federal government, nobody? Is that the case?
The state and federal government does the best they can, but even we don't know where many of these mines are located.
Well, this was in Colorado, but I note that in Colorado there are 3 mines listed on something called the National Priorities List.
Yes.
Does this mean that those mines pose a risk as we speak for leakage?
The reason it's on the national priorities list, which you might think of as a Superfund list, is that
and I don't understand why this isn't covered by the Superfund.
Well, there has been discussion about whether it should be on the national priorities list. President Beyer has written to me, and I'll take that letter very seriously. There have been discussions, but up until 2005, there was a good opportunity to clean this up, and it was going in the right direction.
Ms. McCarthy, I need to know whether this acid mine pollution with these 500,000 or so mines poses any danger to drinking water or to fish and other wildlife.
I would have to say throughout the country there are many instances in which we're looking at sites on the national priorities list which do pose significant hazard, yes.
Including drinking water. We could have some of this leakage into the drinking water of the American people.
That is a continual threat from many of our...
But we don't have any way of knowing that until it's there.
Well, on the national priority list, EPA is responsible for monitoring those sites and for taking action if the responsible party isn't. And so we are monitoring those. The concern I think I have more
after
is
you monitor,
those that
can you then alert or make somebody do something about it, and who does something about it?
It's either the responsible party or EPA.
Or EPA.
That's correct. But we only have a small fraction of the mines on the national priority list.
What do you do to get on that list?
It has to be called to our attention. We have to do a site assessment. We have to consult and confer with the governor in the site or the leadership in the tribes in order to have it on the national priority list. And we have to make a decision that is very process-oriented and public to get that on a site and to allow us to then spend federal and state dollars on a more full and rich cleanup.
Well, I see the ball is in our court on that, and I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now turn to Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarthy, good to see you again.
You too,
I want you, if you would, to clear up something for me. Chairman Bishop, when he asked you about why you didn't notify the Fish and Wildlife, it says your testimony was that you didn't anticipate a discharge, and so there was no notification. then upon further questioning from Mr. Fleming about an unrelated, you said that a discharge was imminent, that you believed that it was going to happen. So which is it? Your testimony to Mr. Bishop or your testimony to Mr. Fleming? Because they seem to conflict.
Well, let me try to be a little clearer. I apologize if I haven't been. We were there because concern was raised that there was pressurized water in the mine, in that adit, and that it might result in a blowout. That is the reason we were doing the work, was try to alleviate that pressure. The actions we were taking were certainly not intended to cause the blowout. In the actual professional opinion of those on the site was that that would not happen.
All right, so let me go a little bit further then, because anytime you do any kind of work, there's a plan.
There is.
And so who approved the plan? EPA. Don't you approve the plan?
Essentially, that's
okay. I'm troubled because I looked at that video and very familiar with 402 permits, a number of, I've been there, done that.
Yes.
And there was no, it doesn't even seem like you followed your own guidelines that would be applied to the private sector. I didn't see any of those there, so did you intentionally avoid your own guidelines?
There were plans. There was a plan. It was developed by.
Did you follow 402 general guidelines?
We actually, I believe, followed all permits. But what?
No, I didn't ask. I said 402 guidelines. That's a specific question.
We did, because we were actually not.
So where was the retention? You know, where was all?
There was actually a retention pond that was constructed.
The retention pond was behind the truck?
No,
because
actually,
I saw the video. It started flowing to the truck. Where's the retention pond?
The retention pond was constructed in a way that would have managed the anticipated release. That was our anticipated release we were trying to generate in order to relieve the pressure. Because it was a blowout, that treatment pond was clearly inundated very quickly.
Yeah, but Ms. McCarthy, listen, you're talking to somebody who's done this. Normally what you have are multiple retention ponds in case of a blowout. I know that I've had to construct them. And so you anticipate worst-case scenarios, and it doesn't look like you anticipated worst-case scenarios. It looked like you kind of cut some corners to try to get it done, and you had a traco there working on it.
This was one of the issues that the internal review raised as to whether or not the emergency plan was adequate.
Well, what's your opinion on that? Was it adequate? Your opinion. I'm not asking.
Well,
was it adequate?
The internal review clearly pointed out
that it wasn't
what
adequate.
They saw was not adequate.
Okay, so let me finish.
I do not know what else is there, but I honestly think we have to look at the Department of the Interior.
Okay, why do we have to look at the Department of Interior? You keep coming back to that as this independent agency.
Yes.
Well, it's part of the administration, so I hardly see the DOI being independent necessarily the way that we would think of independent. So why not the Inspector General?
The Inspector General is looking at this issue.
But why wouldn't they have the main authority, the Inspector General for the EPA?
They're going to be looking at this, but
why wouldn't they have the main authority?
We are going with the agencies that have significant expertise. It's the Department of the Interior, the Army Corps. One of the things we did was to make sure that we weren't defining the scope of work.
So who decided who's going to inspect who? Did you decide who's going to be independent?
No, I left that up to staff to look at staff and others.
But your agency decided who is going to be independent.
We actually consulted with a number of agencies. Those agencies agreed to do it. They have.
So can you get those documents to the committee in terms of those inquiries that were made in terms of who would be best? Because obviously if you made multiple inquiries, you have data and emails to back that up.
I certainly can see what we have available if that's the request, but we did try to get
I would ask that you
try to get authorities to actually look at this that would have the expertise to be able to do an independent review.
If you would get that to the committee, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Yeah, under 5 minutes. Well done. Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for both of the chairmen, thank you for having this hearing. Ms. McCarthy, it's probably no secret to you that tens of millions of Americans fear the EPA, despise it, and even hate it. Many of them are in my district. One of the reasons many Americans feel this way is the high-handed and arrogant way that the EPA operates. It is constantly moving the goalposts of environmental standards. In many, if not all of these cases, the existing standards are already quite stringent and have been complied with at great expense on the part of taxpayers or the private sector. To ignore the high economic cost of further tightening of standards shows a disregard for the difficulties that many everyday Americans face in putting food on the table without having to pay higher prices for energy or losing jobs because of the higher costs of regulation to business. So my state of Colorado, for instance, is currently being forced to sue the EPA to avoid the ill-considered Clean Energy Plan, which has an extremely high cost for little or no environmental benefit. Now, the arrogance of the EPA is seen by its reaction in the aftermath of the horrible environmental disaster in Colorado that we're here to discuss and investigate today. No one has been punished, and the EPA is seeking to avoid any hit on its budget for judgments against it resulting from this disaster. It wants other parts of the federal government to pay any judgments. So this, to me, Ms. McCarthy, is a double standard, because had the private sector caused the environmental tragedy in Colorado, there would be serious fines and possible criminal penalties. So this brings me to my first question. In light of the perceived double standard that the EPA operates under, where the private sector is not allowed to use its own science and come to its own conclusions unquestioned, would you support legislation by Congress that would require the EPA to disclose to the American people online whatever science it uses to form its judgments?
Sir, I'm not prepared to talk in big picture about what we would support or not support. I am here to tell you that we have taken full responsibility for this issue. We are treating us the same way we would be treating the private sector. And while you are absolutely right, we enforce our statutes. That's what brings the public health and environmental protections and benefits that people rely on in this country. And I believe they will continue to rely on our ability to deliver those.
A private company would have to absorb a fine assessed by the EPA from its budget, and you're seeking to have...
Yeah. Not in this consequence. This was actually a response action to try to mitigate a danger that was pointed out to us in the challenge for the private sector would be the same as account and accountability for all of the damage that it caused.
So a private
That's
company
exactly what we're doing.
A private company wouldn't have been fined
Only if
they were acting in good faith.
Only if the actions they were taking were against an order or a settlement, or someone was found negligent or criminal in the activities. And those last two issues are what the Department of the Interior will help inform. If we were negligent, if we didn't do what we should have done, if we didn't do due diligence, then we will have to be held accountable for that as well.
Now, in the meantime, let me ask you this about the contractor.
Yeah.
Is the contractor being suspended from further work on mines until the results of the investigation come back?
No, sir, because the consultant the contractor was working under the direct supervision of our on-site coordinator. It is my understanding that at this point we don't have any reason to believe that he wasn't doing the work that he was tasked to do.
So it was the EPA director's fault for...
I'm not sure where fault lies. That's what the Department of the Interior is going to identify. The question is, the key decision that was made there was the understanding based on the site conditions, and this was the experts from us in Colorado, that there was low or no pressure. That was the key decision. It wasn't the fact that he did the work the way the task order indicated. It was the fact that a determination was made that proved to be incorrect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing today. And I would like to pick up where Mr. Lambert was. You just said that if a private company did what they should have done, there would be no problem. What I would submit to you likewise, that if the EPA had done what they should have done, we would not have had this spill. So there ought to be equal consequences for the EPA, just as there are to private citizens. And I cannot believe for 1 minute that the EPA would not aggressively go after another group, another company, a private company, who was involved in cleaning up a potential environmental hazard, particularly if they did not have the experience and expertise of doing so, and they created a problem such as the EPA created. You would go after them, and there would be heads rolling, so to speak. And yet that is precisely what the EPA is now guilty of, and to this point, nothing at all has happened. And you said you're treating yourself, the EPA, the same as you do other companies, and quite frankly, that is just not the case. Have you read the summary report of the internal review of the blowout?
Yes, I have, sir.
Okay. You may recall on page 2, the last sentence there, it says, the team conducted a limited review of Internet resources to determine if there are existing guidelines or procedures for investigating sites with similar characteristics as this site. So obviously, the EPA does not have experience in cleaning up mines such as this. They had to refer to the Internet. The expertise apparently is restricted to Google. Is that correct?
I'll have to look at the exact sentence you're reading, but the on-scene coordinator has extensive mining engineering expertise, and we worked with the Colorado Division of Reclamation and Mining and Safety, who have considerable expertise as well, including
well, according to your own,
area.
According to the report, the summary review, EPA relied upon Internet resources to figure out what to do in this scenario, and that's according to what you have submitted. Let me ask you this. According to the Federal Tort Claims Act, are you familiar with the discretionary function exemption?
No, sir.
Okay, that is a legal loophole within the law that would allow the EPA to get out of having to pay for any damages. And my question to you was whether or not the EPA plans to utilize that exemption. But
well,
you're saying you're not familiar with it.
I'm not an expert in the claims process. I apologize if we need to answer your questions in more detail.
Okay, well then my question to you is, that is a legal loophole in the law. Will you commit to us today that the EPA will not utilize that loophole and that you will pay for damages?
We will work with DOJ to compensate as appropriate. I do not.
Will you not utilize?
Will
you not utilize a legal loophole to get out of it?
I can't say that I'll do something against the law. I'm sorry, sir. I can't do that. But
no, this is in the law. I just don't want the EPA utilizing a loophole to get out of what you are responsible.
I'm not going to try to get out of any of my responsibilities.
Okay. Are you familiar with Greensboro, Georgia, in my district? There was a similar experience about 6 months ago where the EPA likewise had a contractor that made a mistake, and they struck a water main, and lead, arsenic, mercury, all sorts of things went into the Oconee River and Lake. Are you familiar with that?
I don't recall it.
Okay, it's another example of the EPA having a similar problem, and Mr. Chairman, I would like unanimous consent for this Fox News report to be added.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. I would just conclude, because I know we're in a hurry here, but you have stated that you are taking full responsibility for this spill, and in light of the criminal charges, the prison sentences, the incredible fines that others have experienced for much less, and many of those examples have been brought forth today, much smaller accidents, Ms. McCarthy, in the interest of fairness to the American people who have experienced the wrath of the EPA for much smaller scenarios and accidents in this, I think it's only appropriate that you would resign as a statement of fairness for what other Americans have experienced for much smaller incidents. Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and with that, I yield.
Yields back. Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Chaffetz for having this hearing and allowing Natural Resources to be part of the committee. Thank you, Ms. McCarthy, for making the trip today. Several things I'm looking at is that, well, first of all, when I look at how people have to deal with their government and their regulations is proportionality. You know, we know what accident, how that is defined. It's when something happens that's out of their control, that they didn't intend to do, that they didn't want to have happen and probably wish they could have head off somehow. But that said, accidents do happen. We forgive people for accidents. Yet we see an unforgiveness attitude coming from your agency with people that haven't done things intentionally. So when we talk about proportion, for example, coming back to that West Virginia mine spill where it was 7,500 gallons of water, that people faced criminal indictments immediately and could end up in prison. The company's out of business. But in this case here, with 3 million gallons being dumped when other activities should have been taken ahead of time, that's 400 times the amount of pollutant that got out. You know, basically we're talking about one company the size of a small backyard doughboy pool versus 400 of those types of pools in this. So the proportion for the criminal charges for them versus what has been brought upon either your contractor or the people in your organization, do we expect that we should have a 400 multiplier for prison time being charged against some of your employees or contractor?
So the West Virginia spill ended up actually contaminating drinking water supplies for many people. It caused significant concern, and it was done by a company that wasn't following the law in their requirements. That's why that was pursued. In this instance, I am not saying that that 3 million gallon spill did no damage. Clearly, you'll hear that damage happened, whether or not it was physical or not. But the difference here is that when there is an accident, you have to determine whether somebody was doing the things they should have been doing and an accident occurred that they couldn't have anticipated, or whether there is fault and blame. That's what we're trying to determine with the independent review, and we will follow wherever that goes.
In the case of your organization, once again, a question earlier was posed if you have a project in anticipation of a possible blowout, which you admit to in your documents, that it was very, very, very possible of a blowout, that you should have been notifying Fish and Wildlife. Therefore, that was a violation of the law. So should this committee, should this House, should somebody be coming down hard on your agency and your people for violating the law and not having that notification, but even more so, some of the other measures that could have been taken? You called this is a pressure situation in that mine. So should have hydrostatic testing been made, which is again referred to in documents, because there's acknowledgement in some of your documents that testing should have been done ahead of time, but it was seen as technically challenging or maybe costly. Now in the end game, this is much more costly and brings much more embarrassment upon your agency and much damage to the tribes down and many other people down the stream, as well as drinking water, like you mentioned a minute ago. So how much should we come after you for not following the law and notifying Fish and Wildlife, but as well as not even following what your own documents show that you should have had hydrostatic testing, as well as the possibility of putting a relief pipeline, drilling that in place that would relieve the pressure? How hard should we come down on you for this?
I do not believe that the agency violated the Endangered Species Act, and we can continue to look at that and talk. The more important thing is, you're absolutely right. If we did something wrong, then you should come after us. And frankly, I'm going to take full accountability for that as well.
Well, again, back to proportionality. My constituents in my rural district face a lot of issues from federal agencies coming after them, that somebody trying to change their cropland from grazing or a wheat field to, say, an orchard field, where they have to prepare the soil differently. They can have somebody on their case over their soil preparation with large, large fines. It indeed has happened. Does that seem fair, especially when the people involved have, if there's a period which they would make an application and they don't hear back from the federal agency, under the law it says they can then proceed and then they come back after that, say, 90-day period? Does that seem fair, that they believe they're operating in the law and then they come down upon them?
Sir, I can't speak to any particular instance that I'm unaware of, but I
well,
think
under the waters of the
our
United
job
States, our folks are really, really taking a hit on that. So I thank you.
Appreciate it. Sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Time's out. Follow the law. Next one, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarthy, thank you for coming again today. 5 months ago, the EPA sent toxic sediment into a creek in Greensboro, Georgia. Initially, the EPA denied having anything to do with the project, but then later admitted that it funded the cleanup and the development operation that triggered the spill. Did you request a Department of Interior review for that spill?
I'm not directly aware of it, sir, so I will have to get back to you.
All right. The record indicates that you didn't. And it makes me wonder why after an accident like that you didn't stop all of these cleanup efforts, and particularly with the Gold King mine after having a spill in Georgia just a few months ago. Let me ask you this. You've been asked several times if anyone at EPA is going to lose their job over this incident. Has anyone at the Environmental Restoration LLC been fired or disciplined over this? And I think you may have answered that. Am I correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, and am I correct in that you responded earlier that you're continuing to use them as a contractor?
That is correct.
Also, are you aware that it was reported that the EPA collected about 15,000 tons of poisonous waste from 2 Leadville mines in 2005 and dumped them down the shaft of the new Mikado mine without notifying the mine owner, who happens to be Mr. Hennis, who owns the Gold King mine, and that the EPA did not take responsibility for that and did not assist or pay for the cleanup?
I'm not aware of that incident, sir.
I think you need to look into that as well. One of the things that really concerns me about this, and I realize the EPA has a job to do, but I've brought this to your attention before about some of the heavy-handed tactics that the EPA engages in. And Chairman Bishop earlier in his questions talked about the fact that the EPA has clearly violated federal law, that it doesn't matter that the EPA didn't realize that they violated the law, or that the EPA didn't intend to violate the law, or that the EPA was just trying to do its job when it violated the law. That doesn't matter. And I'm saying it doesn't matter in the context of how you've treated other folks. I think Mr. Gosar brought up the case of Edward Hanasek. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison for discharging oil into a navigable stream. He was convicted despite the fact he was off duty and not present when the accident occurred. Lois Alt of West Virginia, she's a poultry farmer. The EPA spotted some feathers and droppings near her chicken houses. Now, having grown up on a farm, I'm fairly familiar with that. I think most people who've been around chicken farms would expect to see that. But they told her that she had to get a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, or she'd be fined $37,500 a day. Miss Alt, true to her native West Virginia spirit, is fighting it. Andy Johnson from Wyoming has been mentioned. Mr. Johnson built a stock pond for his horses and cattle on his 8-acre property, a stock pond that a former Army Corps of Engineers enforcement officer inspected and concluded that it provided environmental benefits, including improved wildlife habitat, and that the water flowing out of the pond is 3 times cleaner than the water flowing into it, yet Mr. Johnson has been fined $16 million. Now, this is just a small farmer. Then you've got this situation with the Range Resources Corporation in Texas, a natural gas company, being forced to spend $4.2 million defending itself in 2011 after the EPA issued an emergency order. EPA accused the Range Resources of causing or contributing to the contamination of 2 water wells, and then when it was quickly determined that they didn't have anything to do with it, despite the incontrovertible evidence to this fact, the EPA claimed that it was not required to prove it even allege any connection between Range Resources and the contamination. You were going to continue on that path to force them to pay that until you finally relented and gave that up. You also turned over the personal data of 80,000 farmers to environmental groups. I don't understand why you can come before this committee and sit there and say that you're sorry for what you've done in the context of how you've treated private companies. You really ought to be sorry. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Despite efforts to try to minimize the significance of this spill, the facts can't be ignored that 3 million gallons of acidic, heavy metal-laden water were released into the Animas River, not because of an accident, but because of mistakes made by the EPA. Mistakes caused by neglect, because of a culture of arrogance where the EPA assumes they can operate outside the rules and regulations that others must adhere to. And quite simply, the EPA did not have those in responsible charge with the education, professional experience, licensure, and continuing education required to do this job properly, to safeguard life, health, and property, and to promote general welfare. Administrator McCarthy, we can't put this water back in the hole, but I hope we can hold everyone accountable who negligently let it out. Along with that, I hope you will make procedural changes, take incompetence out of the equation, and prevent future spills. Under current procedures and practices, I have concern in your ability to safeguard the public's interest. Administrator McCarthy, do you believe that the activities conducted at the Gold King site would require engineering design work?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't know whether I'm qualified to answer that question, but I'll certainly respond if you'd like me to.
Maybe I can help you out. Colorado defines the practice of engineering as the performance for others of any professional service or creative work requiring engineering education, training, and experience in the application of special knowledge in the mathematical and engineering sciences to such professional services or creative work, including consultation, investigation, evaluation, planning, design, and the observation of construction to evaluate compliance with plans and specifications in connection with the utilization of the forces, energies, and materials of nature and the development, production, and functioning of engineering processes, apparatus, machines, equipment, facilities, structures, buildings, works, or utilities, or any combination or aggregations thereof employed in or devoted to public or private enterprises or uses. Again, I'll ask you, do you agree activities conducted at the Gold King site would require engineering design work?
I think that I am well aware that there was a work plan that involved a significant amount of engineering expertise. What you asked me was the exact actions at the site. I'm not prepared to answer that portion of the question.
You're saying you don't have
engineers.
the expertise to determine whether professional services were required there. But you did say in your earlier testimony that the on-site coordinator had significant mine engineering experience. And you did say
that was my understanding.
That engineering expertise went into preparing this work plan.
Yes, that's correct.
Colorado law also further goes on to say that engineering, it requires that only a professional engineer may practice engineering, and that all engineering documents, plats, and reports issued in connection with engineering work performed must bear the seal and signature of the Colorado licensed professional engineer who is in responsible charge of and directly responsible for the engineering work. Did a professional engineer design or stamp drawings or the plan for the work being conducted at the Gold King site which resulted in the blowout?
I'm happy to follow up on that. I can't answer that question.
I would think that if an engineer did that, if you contracted those services or if you had someone on staff to do that, that you would have those documents with you and say, we followed the procedures that were outlined by a competent professional in charge of this. So far, all I've heard is that you had a project coordinator overseeing work at this site. Who is this person?
I don't have his individual name, sir.
Do you know what their credentials are?
I don't have his bio in front of me, sir, but I do know that the work plan itself wasn't developed at the site. It was developed with the state of Colorado after significant public input from the Animas River State.
Public input and professional expertise are not the same thing. This is a serious matter that you should have had a professional design person in charge of to stamp these plans or drawings or whatever it was that you had.
I am suggesting I can't answer your question at this point, but I'm happy to follow up.
In looking at data, you have 15,326 employees in the EPA as of March 2015. In Region 8, you have 642. Across the country, you only have 12 civil engineers on staff. You have 2 geologists and 1 civil engineer working in Region 8.
Wow.
I think this is unacceptable, and I think you're at fault for not having the required design professional in charge of this work.
See what happens when we have an engineer on the panel. Ms. Grisham, you snuck in right in time. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's nice to see you again. Realize this is a difficult hearing, Administrator McCarthy, but we all want the same thing. Recognize that we don't want to have these kinds of issues and mistakes going forward. Everything in your power to mitigate, and quite frankly, I personally appreciate EPA's attitude about taking full responsibility, but for the 3 million gallons of toxic, and I'm sure that everyone has repeated this over and over again, into the Animas River and surrounding area. And I really want to focus my question on making sure that we are as holistic as possible about identifying just exactly what the harm is, how we identify and address that harm, and how we assess the long-term impacts. Specifically, and I hope that President Beyer from the Navajo Nation will forgive me for this, because as he spoke and in his testimony about the Navajo principle of Hosho, it's very important, I think, not to overlook that the beauty and order and harmony of these very beautiful, pristine areas, that in the legal context, if we don't deal with actual damage and future damage and make it completely whole, then it can't be available for the kinds of both economic activities and personal activities that we know are critical to this entire area and region. And I know that that's going to be a complicated process to place a monetary damage from this kind of spill that are more traditional: damaged crops, suspended outdoor recreation and tourism. And I'm looking at making sure that we restore the area to its original aspect and the potential that it had prior to the spill. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you're going to identify both the long-term impacts that are yet unknown, and about how you're going to encompass this Hosho, if you might, aspect that we're interested in getting full compensation for in this entire region for all the states that are affected?
Well, there's two long-term issues that we need to address, and I know time is constrained, so I'll try to keep this limited. I mean, we have a long-term responsibility to deal with the sediment issue. And that's been one of the major concerns of President Beyer and the Navajo, which we appreciate, and others, because we know that that river has not been of high water quality for some time. Sediment has been a concern. We have to monitor that closely. We now have a long-term concern about that we share, and we're developing a plan to do that will get input from everybody on, so we address that.
So I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but the second long-term issue is what happens in the upper Animas. We are not close to resolving the challenges associated with the ongoing discharge, which frankly dwarfs the spill we have. And we have to address that. In terms of looking at this more broadly than a technical challenge, one of the challenges that the Navajo and frankly the Southern Ute and others have expressed to us is we have a trust responsibility with the tribes, which make this more important. We have
not only more important, I'm going to reclaim my time, Administrator, but also there's a culture of mistrust, not just for all trust responsibilities, but a specific culture of mistrust between the EPA and our nations. And particularly in this case, I hope, I don't overstep my authority here, but particularly for the Navajo Nation, I'm expecting in that plan, Administrator, that you identify very specifically monetary aspects and monetary damages related to the long-term impacts. And while I completely respect that you're looking at the continuation of environmental problems, which is absolutely your job, and I want you to do that job as effectively as you can. I want everybody made whole, and I'm not feeling as confident about that, particularly in your plan, because I'm running out of time. I'm going to need you to address how individuals process their claims, what you're going to do to make that a non-painful process. The unemployment rate of the Navajo Nation is upwards of 42%. People can't wait and wade through a terrible bureaucratic aspect to process file and wait for their claims, and to use all of our collective offices. I see my colleague here, Congressman Pierce, to try to do the appellate work that I am sure will be necessary to get fair review. And you've got just a few seconds to assure me that we're going to do that.
We'll do the best we can. Thank you.
You can still go for 7 seconds if you want. I'm kidding. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Administrator, for being here.
Not at all.
One of the risks of being a freshman is I'm right down here in the line of fire with you. But I just had one question in the light of the Chairman's wanting to get to the other people who have been so patient waiting here. Certainly this is an unfortunate incident, one that we must do all we can to prevent from happening again. We need to learn from this, but also the word accountability has been thrown around a lot this morning, and you've said as much yourself that you will follow this wherever it goes, and I appreciate that. Could you tell me, how do you define the accountability here? What would that look like in the end?
Well, there'll be accountability in two ways, whether or not we had administrative and management failures or whether we had any criminal concerns that arise out of the independent review. Those are two related but separate issues.
Well, I can say, having run an agency myself in a former life, that I believe the ability of the agency and the credibility of the agency, its ability to perform its duties is truly on the line here, is as much at risk as anything else. And so I would hope that we can take you at your word that the accountability aspect of this will be followed to wherever it goes, and that we are satisfied that the people that are in charge are held accountable.
Well, I know that we have both the Inspector General who looks at these issues in the Oversight Committee, and I expect we'll be able to walk through the accountability issues when all the facts are on the table.
So could you tell me a little bit about the protocol when the spill happened?
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about what the agency's first actions were? What protocols are for this kind of a
sequence
spill?
that we expect from the agency or anybody in this situation is first and foremost to protect the folks that are on the site, to make sure that there is no potential for humans for safety issues to arise. And then the second issue is the challenge is to minimize the spill as much as you can to get that under control. And the third is to take a look at the impacts downstream so that you can address those and mitigate those as well. And then obviously there's a longer-term challenge of making sure that there is appropriate compensation through the Claims Act. And in the case of EPA, where we had partners working with us in states and tribes to also reimburse them for their expenses.
Can you say whether or not that these protocols were all followed, and were there any, just as importantly, that were not or not followed as well as they should have been? Hindsight, I know, is 2020.
Yeah, I am not aware that we didn't follow the correct procedures. I am certainly aware that we could have done better on notification. I think we will have to learn from those lessons, and we've already started to do that. We'll learn from whatever DOI says about what caused the incidents, what was the precipitating factors, and what we need to do about it. Unfortunately, sometimes you learn from some of the worst things, and this is one of them.
I would agree with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
We're going to have three other members who are not a part of our committees who are here to ask questions. Mr. Pierce, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Administrator, for being here today. Now, we had some difference of opinion on whether or not the EPA was pushing for these Form 95s to be signed. The President Begay's testimony says that apparently EPA was trying to obtain releases for members. So since we've got a difference of opinion, would you declare here today that any of these forms filled out before today and signed maybe unknowingly by members of the Navajo Nation would simply be disallowed and they'd be allowed to resubmit that paperwork?
Those can be changed at any point in time. I am
Okay.
unaware that
All right.
any have been submitted, but we've been working
Okay.
to explain
All
the
right.
form and how to do that with
Sounds
the
great. Also, in order to dilute down the spill, 1.3 billion gallons of water dumped that belongs to the Navajo Nation, are you going to reimburse that? 1.3 billion of gallons of
say that
water
again?
in New Mexico is a big deal.
I do not know what you're referring to. I'm sorry, sir.
Okay, I would expect then for you to look into that
Okay,
and get
sure.
back with our office that that water was released in order to
Oh,
dilute.
the water released at the dam.
Yes. So now you're familiar?
Well, I didn't know what you're referring to. I
Okay.
am aware that that happened. I was.
Are you going to be reimbursing the tribe for that?
I do not know I do not know whether that is something that
You're going to follow up and find out.
The Navajo has
It-
not raised that issue with me, so I'll find
Okay,
out
it'd be
what the
practical
concern is.
to understand
Okay.
that. Also, to the Chairman Bishop's point earlier that that we needed everybody on the same panel. Evidently, that you made the assertion that EPA helped New Mexico shut off the intakes for public water systems.
I indicated that the notifications.
No, I didn't ask about the notification. I asked about the help.
That's what I was talking about.
All right. His comment, Secretary Flynn's comment was that you weren't involved at all in the decision. It was done entirely by New Mexico, and we could prosecute
No,
that
the
decision
state-
if we
the
had
state
everybody on the
does
same
that.
panel together.
No.
So the whole idea of accountability,
Yes.
your comments, is anybody's negligent or criminal activity, at different time you said any administrative oversights to be dealt with.
That's part of the.
About how long would you think that we would be before we know the outcome of that? How long will that investigation take?
They're anticipating to be completed in October.
Okay. So then my point to the others who maybe distrust that you actually follow through on that, does the name Robert Beal or John Beal mean anything to you?
Very much does, sir.
Okay, so he's thrown in jail for 3 years for bilking the taxpayers out of about $1 million minimum. Has any money been received back from him? Did you all as an agency go and claw back money that he had fraudulently filed for?
We actually have, and we continue to look
Okay,
at that. And try
and
to
so
mechanism.
there were people in the agency who had to sign leave, travel, salary bonuses, all that sort of stuff, right?
I'm aware of that, yes.
Has anybody been held accountable for that?
The processes were in place. If there's additional that we need to do.
No. Are any of the supervisors that signed off for him coming to work or him going someplace that he didn't actually go, traveling first class, has anybody been held accountable for that?
There was a process in place.
No. Has anyone been held accountable for that? Are any of the management people who signed those things knowing that he wasn't work or not knowing?
Well, one of
because
the-
it would be, again, going back to this situation, that oversight would be negligence, wouldn't it? If somebody signed a leave form or signed a performance bonus when he
I
didn't
don't know
deserve
what the
it?
exact term is, sir, but that is absolutely an administrative responsibility for us.
And yet,
to
no
take a
one
look
has
at
been
that.
held accountable to date. And so people on this committee have a distrust that your study, which is going to be complete, you said, in October, will actually result in anyone doing anything, having any consequence to them at all. And now you were his direct supervisor for 4 years, 9 through 12, 3 years, 4, I don't know, something.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And so again, if people here have a little difficulty in believing that you're going to actually follow through on this issue, they look at that issue and say, the highest paid employee of the EPA simply gets to skate for 20 years not showing up for work, and no one is held accountable. No one.
Actually, I
is
was
held.
the person who held John Beal accountable.
Yeah.
I was the one that referred this, and
I
I'm
understand
really
that you
proud
were
of
the one who
time he's
discovered
spending in
it, but
jail.
you also signed off fraudulent payments to him that he
No,
did
I
not
did not.
deserve, and nothing has happened to you or anyone else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCarthy, you'd recently stated on August 13th that we're going to be fully accountable for this in a transparent way.
Yes, sir.
That was your quote. Just as a follow-up, we'd sent a letter to you on August 15th, signed by 29 other members, listing out specific questions regarding the spill. When can we expect an answer? You have yet to respond.
I will, I'm sorry, when did you say you sent that?
August 15th.
Okay, I will double check and we'll get you a tentative date. And
No,
we'll
that'll be
try
great.
to keep
Mr. Westerman, Mr. Pierce, you're citing you're going to get back to people. I think that's a lot of frustration of the committee work. We hear we'll get back to you, but
Well, sir, I
we never
haven't
do.
seen it, and I
So-
don't want to give you a date that then
Great.
I didn't have to explain away because
Well,
I
terrific.
don't know
Well,
the
if you
extent.
can get back to us on that, we would
All right.
appreciate
Mhm.
it. In regards to transparency, you said that the EPA was examining different sites that could suffer an EPA meltdown, as we saw at the Gold King mine. You've identified 10 different mines now, but that did not come forward until such time as there was an AP report. How's that feeding in with transparency?
I'm sorry, I don't exactly know the context in which you're referring
Well,
to.
the context
but-
of the question is you've identified 10 mines
That's
that have the
correct.
potential to be able to have a spill.
No, what we did was, when this happened, I issued a memo to put a hiatus on all mining operations that we, mining recovery or what's the word I'm looking for? Cleanups that we were involved in. And as a result of that, those cleanups stopped, and we have identified 10
Okay.
that look
Are you
similar to
revealing
this,
the
where we have
locations
to
of
make
all
sure
these
we don't.
mines?
Say it again?
Are you revealing the locations of all the mines?
If folks want to have that was, I think the states were
Okay.
revealed, and they may have the
We have,
the
in the AP
locations as well.
report, one of the mines was a standard mine near Crested Butte in Colorado, which is in my district. Is that information correct, that that is one of the suspect mines?
I do not know, sir, but I can go back and take a look.
Okay, well, we'd appreciate having the follow-up on that. And what about districts, other than mine, but other members on this committee? Do you feel that it's going to be important to be able to reach out and give that notification in advance of potential spill areas, just as we saw at the Gold King mine, to let people know in these districts?
Yeah. The Gold King mine was raised to us rather than the other way around. We got it involved, is my understanding, because there was identified to be a blowout problem. And so we'll continue to work cooperatively, and there was no secrets here. That work was being done in a very transparent and publicly accessible way.
I'd like to change gears just a little bit here. I would like to know, how many mining engineers does the EPA employ?
I can't answer that right now, sir. But
Do you know if there are any?
I
You don't
know
have
we-
to give me a specific number. Do you
I know we
employ
have a
any?
mining team, a national mining team that works on these issues, and I know that we
The
work
team,
on
do you have any
mining sites.
engineers?
I do not know, sir.
You don't know. Can you get back to us on that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You know, you've cited a number of times that you work with a lot of people with a lot of expertise in this area. And I think a lot of the concern that we see is just given some of the protocols that you put into place when we want to be able to juxtapose this to a private company that is meeting rigid standards, that your organization puts together those standards. When you, through the document dump that came out about 2 weeks ago on a Friday, cited that there was a potential for a blowout at the Gold King mine, why was there no effort to be able to determine how much water had actually backed up?
Well,
If
that-
we're talking about having the expertise.
Well, I'd have to go back and identify what both Colorado and EPA were basing their judgments on, but it was a concern of the entire community, including the Animas River stakeholder
It was
group.
concerned.
There
I'm
was
just
a
trying
blowout
really to get
potential.
to the point of prudency. In terms of your position on it, it's your job. You're the one that's setting this up.
Well,
When we were looking through your documents saying that there was a potential for a
Yes.
blowout at the Gold King
That's
mine,
why we were there.
would it have been prudent to have measured how much water is behind the wall that was built up?
Well, that's one of the issues, is did we take all the prudent steps we needed to, and that's what the Department of the Interior is going to be able to help inform.
Can you understand some of the frustration, the position that you put
Yeah.
yourself in
Yeah.
as being the enforcers, the experts in the field, and you're saying, this is a mystery. We're having now to look back and see what went wrong. You know, this is in my district.
Yes, sir.
I've talked to engineers, miners that work in that area. They would have not have proceeded the way that the EPA did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So McCarthy, let me save you some time in getting back with him. According to your website, you have 0 mining engineers. Actually, Scott, our committee has more mining engineers than EPA does. Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And along that same line of questioning, I would like to know how many hydrological engineers you have on your team.
I do not know that answer, sir.
How about many geological engineers?
I do not know that answer either.
I guess the question I'd go along with that, then how do we have the expertise in hiring a contractor to do this? Or why does the EPA figure that they have that expertise if you don't know? Isn't it your responsibility to know?
Not on every site, sir, but it's my responsibility to manage the agency appropriately.
Did you know that the EPA requires that mines, before they can be opened, they have an environmental and a NEPA process done? And in order to do that, they have to have geological engineers. They have to have hydrological engineers. They have to have mining engineers to go along with that. Is that true?
I'm not that familiar with it, sir, but those are the issues that the Department of Interior...
And you're the head of the department. Don't you feel that's your responsibility to know what you need in your department?
Again, it's my responsibility to manage the agency effectively.
And so before you hire somebody, what's the hiring process of a contractor to before they begin work on such a project as this?
I can't say that I've ever been directly involved in that hiring process, but I am aware that we set criteria for the credibility of the contractors, and we look for those with experience and background that's appropriate, and we do that through an RFP process.
And how would we know what that experience and process is if we potentially don't have the experience in our own staff, the EPA's own staff, to be able to hire that type of a contractor, to understand what you need in that process?
Well, I'm not assuming that we don't have expertise to understand what's
Just
necessary.
ask. I would like that answer to that question. Through this process, when a mine is open, and it's gone on for, at least in the state of Nevada, for 60, 70, 80 years, through these processes, you have to provide documentation, the environmental process, the NEPA process, maybe we'll call it something different in those days, but those processes are there. What happens to those records that are provided by those mine folks? What happens to that information that they have to provide the EPA or any other entity that's with the federal government?
Any information that's provided to the federal government has to be properly retained in accordance with the law.
Do you believe that would be pertinent to the investigation of this mine and how to handle the situation before we just hire a contractor to go do something?
Whatever appropriate steps we should take should be documented.
I think those questions should all be asked before you start that process. I believe there's been a real violation here, and I've been a real problem. And I see it happening within the EPA. They're more worried about the environmental side of the situation than understanding the responsibility they have before these become contractors themselves. So with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If Mr. Lujan were to come in here at some point, we have another panel. We'll make sure that he has a chance of asking some questions there. Ms. McCarthy, appreciate you being here. This is now 3 hours into this hearing. Once again, I will state, I don't want to sound like a teacher berating a student, but had you been willing to share the panel with the other 4 witnesses that were here, it would have been an enlightening opportunity and discussion. And those other witnesses who had some expert testimony could have added some expertise and some answers to the questions that have been here. So I'm very sorry that you were able to do that. At the beginning, I said you might want to apologize to those for not being willing to sit on the same panel with them. I'll give you that same opportunity. But if not, this panel, never mind then, this panel is expended, and we'll invite the other 4 witnesses to come before us and take a position at the table.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, a point of privilege. I will have to be leaving this. I have questions for the additional witnesses that we'll submit to the committee in writing. Conflict I can't resolve. And my apologies to the witnesses that are coming up. And with that, thank you.
I totally understand, and we will submit your questions to these witnesses in writing. Take a brief pause here as we change panels.